The first time it happened to me was in Kansas City, Kansas, when I was working on cops, and it was an unusual call that we got. The dispatcher called, said to our officer, "Hey, can you give us a call? This is a really weird 911 call that came in." She said that a priest had called her because somebody had called this priest and said, "You need to send a car to this address. The front door is going to be open. Tell the police officer to do the right thing and go inside." So we walked inside, and as soon as we walked in there, I felt like somebody had put like a warm blanket over my shoulders that extended all the way to the floor. And as I was walking, I could feel like if you were to have a blanket on you hitting like the back of my like Achilles as I was walking. So we made our way up the stairs, and as soon as we started ascending the stairs, I could see blood on the white walls that were in the hallway there. And then when we got to the first landing and rounded the corner, I'm filming the police officer. He's got his gun out, and he gets on his radio, and he says, "Send IDET and detectives. We've got a homicide." This was like somebody was really angry. This was a hateful kind of death. After he put out the radio call just to make sure that he was dead, came back down the stairs, came outside, put up the crime scene tape, waited for the detectives to get there. We get in the car, me and my sound guy and the officer, and I was like, did anyone feel any kind of weirdness when we crossed the threshold of the house? And the cop goes, "Yeah, I felt like somebody put a blanket on me." And I was like, "Are you shitting me?" I felt the same thing. And I turned back to my sound guy, and he's like, and we're all like, whoa.
I'm so glad that we get to have these conversations with you tonight. I've been looking forward to this for a long time because of your unique perspective, both like from the production side and then also some of the TV shows that I know that you've worked on, which has allowed you to be in proximity to law enforcement and everything. And just like when you look at things, I can tell a lot from watching your content that you see the framing and like how a story is put together from the eye of somebody behind the camera, which is a medium all of its own and a talent all of its own. But to your point, I actually almost sent out a tweet today, and I stopped at the end and I backed all the way back out of it. And I was like, no, that can't go out. I was just like, but it was basically what you said. I said, I'm going to paraphrase myself, but I was like, I just want to thank all of these radical, evil, leftist gunmen lately for putting their entire motive on their rounds for us to find. I was like, that is very, very, in all caps, very convenient for all of us. And then I was like, oh, that could be totally taken the wrong way. Let me back all the way back off this X.
You know what it did make me think of, though? If it's true that all these guys are getting groomed in these Discord servers and all these other places, okay, that they're showing off for all these other little wannabes inside their chat rooms, because maybe they did take a photo of the bullets that they wrote "fuck ICE" or whatever the hell else that was written on there, and they put it in there, some little like clout thing, like this is what I'm doing to kind of pump up the homies, I guess, as it were, and they do what you did. Like maybe that's what the point is, I guess, and then too, once you do something and once something like that becomes mainstream, it's this sort of like meme bazaar that I talk about, where it gets repetitive and it gets replicated because it gets the people going, right? Like, I'm just going to write this on there, and it might be something like that, but that's just, my speculating. I don't know.
All these people remind me of what you would look for if you were, in charge of a program where you wanted suicide bombers or jihadis. We've had a whole generation of white males who people have talked shit about being, masculinity, being misogynist, being toxic. And so these dudes don't know where to go, don't know what to do. And finally somebody reaches out to them and gives them a purpose for something to do. And that's what kind of reminds me of those suicide bombers.
Yeah. Well, it is 100% radicalization 101, but Brandon, it really reminded me too of the conversation that you just had recently about 764
Yeah, I
and
was
how
just about to
deep
say
all
that.
of that stuff went because
Yeah.
and I also had to kind of check myself too because it's like when I look at a lot of these things I think about it from like a rational perspective, and I also think about it from like the tactical perspective. You know, we're talking all about whether or not Homeboy was able to climb onto a roof, assemble a rifle, take a shot, disassemble a rifle with a tool, exit the roof, change clothes, all the crazy things that they're talking about out there. And it's like I look at it from the tactical perspective of like, okay, infill, final firing position, fire, actions on the objective, exfil, what is going to make it, you know, the most efficient so that I can get in, get the job done, get out. But these people, they don't think about it like that. They are radicalized. They don't have a rational view of reality whatsoever. And if you start applying the lens like you were just alluding to of, hey, they were radicalized online, they're trying to gain clout within their
Sphere.
perceived group or sphere of influence that they've been sucked inside of. And that's why it took me back to that whole 764 conversation that you had, because you look at like they were able to get a kid to climb up on a mountain and self-immolate while streaming to Discord. That is insane.
Well, I was just going to ask you, Tom, have you heard about 764 and some of these accelerationist groups online? Yeah.
I have. Drew actually sent me a doc. It's like a mini doc. It's like 20 minutes long or something. And dude, that is like what nightmares are made of. And I forwarded it to my ex-wife because my son and my daughter live with her. And she's a news director at a TV station in South Florida. And I'm like, have you heard of this? She's like, oh yeah, our station's been all over this.
Yeah.
Well, at least there's
Yeah,
that.
it's pretty wild. I'll just shout her out. I talked to Becca Spinks. She goes by BX on X. That's what her handle is, actually. And she's infiltrated some of these groups, and she talks to these guys as if she's looking for information. It's pretty gnarly because she's caught a lot of death threats and things like that. But it's kind of wild to me how much this is this permeates throughout the online community without any sort of notice, because they're not very covert. I mean, I guess like the most covert thing about it is that they are in a Discord server and you can set up permissions to get in there, but they're so successful at keeping kids quiet, which is a very strange thing because kids like talking to other kids and telling them about it. And like from this perspective of 764 or 09A, they're only talking to other kids if they're trying to recruit them, and then they're brought into that circle and then they're quiet too. And that's what makes it scary, because then, you know, they get these kids to do these terrible things and blackmail them into going and doing other things or convincing other kids to go and do terrible things. But it is, to your point, I brought that up because you talked about this pool of people that's sort of perfect for manipulation, that if like if you're a CIA agent, if you're a Jolly West and you're out here looking for, you know, Johns or somebody to go out there and manipulate, you have a ready-made pool of people who are ripe for manipulation online, because they exist even more in an echo chamber than the regular social media user who's beholden to their own personal algorithm. They're getting it not just from what they see randomly, but they're being indoctrinated, to use that word, by people who are also into these very specific things and talking to them about them, and they come up with these plans and they have their own, you know, code words and all this other stuff. It becomes its own language and everything. It's sort of wild. There's nothing like that before.
Right. And I look at the Butler shooter, the retardy Oswald guy, and then this latest dude, and they have this look to them, whereas if I was in that position, they look like dorks. I would go after somebody kind of dorky like that and give a dork a sense of, you know, bringing him into a group and wanting to give him a mission that's bigger than himself. So now he starts living in this fantasy world that he's created through, you know, video games or movies or whatever that he's created, because he's kind of like a self-isolationist at this point. And now you give him a chance to step out of the fantasy world and get into the real world.
It's a really good point. You know, something else that I just thought about too, and I've never put two and two together on this, and it's just complete. This is literally one of those Jesse Ventura moments. I'm just asking questions. Like, I'm not actually alleging anything, but it does kind of make you wonder about how the um, how these social media sites were engineered and built, because it does seem so tailor perfect for accomplishing. You just said that you have a ready-made group of people that are chronically online. They're isolated from reality, right? Which is, and then as soon as you introduce some sort of uh, intrinsic moment or mass, it's something for them all to be scared of. Now you have your ready-made pot for mass formation psychosis, and they're already driven terminally online. It kind of makes you wonder about the architecture of some of these social media sites. And we know for a fact that intelligence assets are, like, basically there's a revolving door between the intelligence community and the big social media platforms, you know
Oh
which
yeah.
now is a really good time. So any and all opinions that you hear here on this podcast, they belong completely and totally to the hosts and the guests, and they do not represent the United States Army, the Department of Defense, or any other entity within the United States government. I have to say that before we get too deep. Sorry, Tim.
But I got to think most of these social media companies, when they first start out, and you can go back to Mark Zuckerberg, there's going to be an angel investor, and we all know that the CIA has a couple of angel investing firms, and we also know that DARPA is involved in coming up with private companies that are creating new technology and so forth. So to me, the Facebook one is obvious. It's like, hey, we've got this company where we can get everybody's picture potentially around the world and get some info on them. If I'm, working at the CIA or an intel agency, I'm going to be like, yes, how much? Let me get the checkbook. Let's do this.
Yeah, it kind of does make you wonder, like when Mark Zuckerberg was back and he designed like Hot or Not, like would smash or wouldn't smash, you know what I mean? Like that's as far as the most college guys' ability to plan goes for. But as soon as you add the angel investor line in there, right? It doesn't take much for people with more nefarious goals in mind to look at that and go, I see potential there, where the original inventor doesn't.
I would say this. I would think that these like Discord servers, things like Discord or Twitch or any of these other places that have this sort of encrypted conversation that happens, that they've probably been infiltrated completely. But I don't know that necessarily those specifically were invented. But there is, to your point, that Zunzunio, which was the X for Cuba or Twitter for Cuba that they came up with to try to steer the results of an election. It was a totally fake social media site that was set up by the CIA, and they tried to use it as a way to get and put ideas into people's heads. So they have done it before. I think what I'm trying to say is I don't think necessarily these chat rooms, these online chat rooms were set up by a government agency, but I think that it was very quickly realized that it could be used in that way. And I say that because think about the chat in Call of Duty, right? You're online on Xbox or PlayStation, and you're talking shit, and people are racist and retarded and death threats and all this other shit that happens in there. And
the
then,
heydays.
I view these sorts of things like Discord or whatever as almost like a continuation of that, because it is used for a very specific community. And I think it's just almost like a step up, that you can get sucked into these online communities playing something like Call of Duty or whatever, and then you find your way into these communities online, and then that's sort of like it's evolved into now a tool used for anybody, really. Maybe people don't just get groomed for things like that. They get groomed for intelligence in those rooms too. Like people get approached by a foreign operative who's pretending to be some hot 21-year-old blonde or Chinese girl, and then now you're, I don't know, you're getting nudes from Google in exchange for F-22 schematics, I guess,
Right.
Well, just remember what they say, man. If they say they're a chick, they're a dude, and if they say they're a kid, they're a fed. Those are the rules to live by.
I guess, yeah. Good luck, Well, Tom, I would like you to introduce yourself. You have quite a length of things you sent me today. I don't think I realized that you are an Emmy Award winner, which is incredible. And then I looked at this entire rap sheet of things that you've had hand in and directed and edited and all this other amazing stuff you did, it's almost too hard to really introduce you. I would like you to do it, and then we're going to talk about some crazy stuff. Like, you've told me some insane things. You've had some experiences that really are unique to anybody we've had a conversation with here. And welcome to the show officially. I'm totally keeping all that little bit at the beginning here. We were talking about this because it was good. But
Sure.
Welcome officially, and audience, meet Tom.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate you taking the time and interest in sort of the weird sort of Forrest Gump type life that I've led over the last 30 years. Well, basically, my career started on a bet, actually. I had gotten kicked out of college. I went home, and a friend of mine called me up and said, hey, there's this new show on TV. Come over and watch it and pick up some beer. So I picked up a 6-pack. We went over and watched it, and it was the TV show Cops. It was like the second season of it. And I remember watching that episode going, dude, I want to crawl on that TV. I want to be one of the camera guys there. And the buddy that I was watching it with, after the show was over, he turns off the TV and he goes, you know what? Because he was mowing lawns at the time. And he goes, I'm going to go down to the police academy and I'm going to become a deputy in the county that we live in. And I said, well, I'm going to go work on that show. I had no idea how I was going to do it because I grew up in Naples, Florida, which is about as far away from Hollywood as you can get.
For sure.
So the next day, I picked up this archaic thing that had pages in it and numbers. It was called a phone book, and that's how you look things up back then.
Whoa.
And I ended up getting a job at a TV station that paid minimum wage. I was paid $3.35 an hour to run the studio camera during the 5, 6, and 11 o'clock news. And I had met the sportscaster who didn't have a sports photographer, so I volunteered on my meal breaks on Fridays to go film high school football games for him during football season. I just kind of fell into shooting sports for free just so I could develop the skill of being able to operate a camera. And so that led me to South Bend, Indiana, where I worked, at Notre Dame. Well, it was a television station owned by Notre Dame. Worked there for a couple of years and then moved down to Indianapolis, which I worked at a Fox affiliate there. And I knew I wanted to work on the Cops TV show, but I still didn't know how I was going to get to it. Because up until that point, everything I had ever done shooting-wise, I always filmed off my shoulder because I knew that I'd hold the camera on my shoulder and film like that instead of like most people do with the tripod. And so it was my way of, getting myself ready for the opportunity to be steady if I ever got the chance to work on the show. So working at a Fox affiliate, we had Cops in America's Most Wanted. So I went into my boss and I said, you know what would be great for Sweeps if I did a 3-part series on the making of Cops. And he's like, I love that idea. Go for it. But unfortunately, we don't have any money to fund it. And so I was like, damn, what am I going to do? I'm not making really any money in local news. So I decided to cash in my 401ks and finance it that way. So I bought the plane tickets, the rental cars, hotels, went and filmed everything, put the piece together, the 3 pieces together. And the way that I wanted to do it was make it just like the Cop show, where how the police narrate what's going on. So
Yeah.
John Langley, who created the show, I interviewed him. So his portion of his segment in the series, it was him narrating it. And then the camera guys out in the field in Buffalo, New York, they were narrating it. And so I sent it off to John so he could take a look at it. And a year later, a reporter from my station was doing a press junket in L.A., and one of the people that she happened to talk to in the interview was John Langley. And she brought up my name. She's like, oh, yeah, I remember that kid. We've got a job opening. If he's interested, have him give Bertram Van Munster a call. And Bertram was the producer at the time who I had met. Reached out to Bert. They brought me out to Boston for a 2-week tryout, and the tryout went well, and that lasted 5 years. Then 9/11 hit, and it was just like everybody else. It was a total, it was like, what is going on here? And I was still working on Cops, and I was in Fort Worth, Texas. And as you guys remember, there were no planes flying. And Fort Worth is pretty close to DFW. It was just weird not seeing any planes in the sky for a couple of days. So I decided that, if they were going to send any camera crews to Afghanistan, I was going to be one of them. So the show goes on hiatus. I just happened to get up early in the morning. My ex-wife's getting ready for work, and I hear the news talking about how there's a TV show going to Afghanistan. And I bolted into the room to watch it, and Bertram, who had been my boss on Cops, who hired me, and Jerry Bruckheimer were doing a show in Afghanistan. And because Jerry Bruckheimer, they had both teamed up to do the show The Amazing Race.
Yeah. Survivor, Kabul.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I got a hold of Bertram, and Jerry Bruckheimer, he produced Top Gun, so he knew Rumsfeld and all the usual suspects that were in, DC at the time.
They were the suspects.
Exactly. And so I called the production manager who was heading it up, and decided then that I was going to do what I could to, capture what was going on in Afghanistan. And then after that, I came back. The cop ship had sailed, so I started working on Amazing Race. I worked on a flurry of different shows. One of the funniest things about I even worked on The Apprentice with Donald Trump. So one of the weird things about my career is one person that I worked with, the host of a show, became president, and the other person I worked with, Joe Lombardo, is now the governor of Nevada. So
oh shit.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah.
So after that, it was weird. The time frame, so this would have been 2002, 2003. And so the trend started in reality television to do these more sort of like expedition type reality shows. We called them cockumentaries. And, you had Survivor, then you had Deadliest Catch, Ice Road Truckers. And so for about a 10-year span there, you had these cockumentaries where it was just balls to the wall, crazy locations, nutty stuff going on, following people with really unique jobs. And now that I look back on it, there's a reason why it's called programming and television. So a lot of this programming and the shows that were happening at the time were inspiring young men for adventure, I think, and to push them in the direction of, of what was going on in Afghanistan and then leading up to Iraq. So you had that whole time frame of having these really highly masculine shows happening. And so toward the end of 2012, I did my last adventure race, and I could tell that the tide was shifting in the production world. So that's when I decided to get away from, these adventure style shows, because there was just no more calls for them. For 13 years, I was getting calls. Hey man, we're going to Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm in. Hey man, we're going to Nigeria. I'm in. And then it just stopped. So I started directing the show Undercover Boss, the one where everybody cries at the end and they have really bad hair pieces for the bosses.
Right.
Yeah.
You're an amazing worker. I want to offer you a raise.
Exactly. And then I did another show called Dating Naked, which was on VH1, which is exactly what you think it is. And then so then after that, it was a couple of years of, directing show. I directed a car show. I was like, man, this kind of sucks. Because at this time in 2013, I had moved out to LA doing the whole LA scene. Because up until then, I was living in Florida. I hadn't moved to LA yet. So I get to LA, I'm going through this grind of, interviewing for different directing jobs, shooting these shows that are just kind of like, they're fun, but they're not really what I'm used to. And then 2016 got a call to be a producer on a show called Live PD, which is like Cops meets the NFL Red Zone. So I did that for a while up until the George Floyd riots, when everything in television that had law enforcement in it was canceled.
LE Super Bowl right there. Didn't go well.
Yeah, so that's kind of I'm sorry, that's the kind of the long version of my career.
No,
so
that's great.
No.
No, I love that because you have such a wide swath of experience. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about is you talked about how you noticed that there was sort of this installed trope that was going on with television at the time, and you said programming in television, and this influence you felt like was going on with trying to get young men to feel masculine and see these masculine things going on, and which is kind of weird. It's almost like a proto algorithm in a way, if you think about it that way. What other where else have you noticed that is going on with this sort of like predictive programming outside of your experience? Because you were in LA, you were around Hollywood, like that is like the epicenter for most of this stuff. Like where else have you seen this happen?
One of the biggest ones that just like plopped on my radar would have been about 2020, like right after the election. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that I think it was CBS that had the FBI franchise. They started making more and more FBI franchises. And I'm like, why would they do that? Because they had one that was doing okay, but then they came up with like 2 or 3 versions of it, all on different nights and all dealing with different parts of the FBI. And then because with that kind of predictive programming, what benefit is it of the FBI to have a show portraying them as the heroes? Well, a good one if you're going after an ex-president, because if you've got the normies sitting at home going, oh, man, check out these FBI guys. They're really doing a great job.
Right.
So when it comes to an arrest or an FBI investigation, the programming is already there subconsciously because you've been watching your favorite show over and over again. These guys are the heroes. And then in real life, it's like, they got to be the heroes. They would never do anything nefarious. They would never plant evidence. They'd never go after autistic dudes and get them all together and come up with a kidnapping plan. They would never in a million years do that.
Right. Well, dude, I totally agree with you. And I think the other part of it is, too, is it's this desire that they have for people to respect authority in its ultimate form. And what is that domestic investigative arm? Well, it's the FBI. And if you can garner this sort of like unhealthy, I guess I would say, perception of them, and then garner this, like, respect may not be the right word, but this sort of fear, I guess, in a way, fear and respect that goes into what you're doing. And you're seeing all these examples, because I've watched some of these shows too. They insert a lot of this social justice things into them, where the character will have this monologue that they zoom in on them and they talk and they say some social justice crap, and then someone will run in with a break in the case, and then it's the flash of the badge and they're out of there, and like that, how nothing actually happens in the law enforcement world ever. But that it's true. It's like you're almost establishing this precedence of, well, you watch TV for entertainment, you're being programmed to love authority in your entertainment, and then I'll get on TV and I'll talk to you about how, well, Merrick Garland is going to go after Catholic school moms, and you should respect that because, like, these guys are hard at work doing this stuff, and Anthony Fauci and the institution of the NIH and these guys, they're just trying to save your life, man. Like, and you sort of get it from all angles. And I've noticed that people who watch cable television like that seem to be the ones that when you talk to them, you're just like, bro, we are watching the same movie or looking at the same screen, but it is 2 different fucking movies right now. Like, we are not even on the same planet.
Right. And also, when you talk about the programming, and you mentioned the social justice sort of inserts that they have to the script, that's also reinforced by people in the FBI or people in the government repeating those same lines. So you're not only watching it in your favorite show, but you're also watching it on, God forbid, I don't know who still is, but still watching network news, because they're just being fed the same thing. It's positive reinforcement for what they think they should believe. One of the best ones that I've seen, and this was maybe like at the beginning of the year, what's that, SVU?
Law and Order?
Law and Order?
Law and Order. And they did that measles episode. Did you guys see that one?
No, I haven't watched Law and Order in
I
a
didn't see the episode,
long
but I
time.
watched somebody rage about it on X one day because of it.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Oh, your child wasn't vaccinated, putting my child
Right.
at risk. I mean, how many times do we see that during that thing that we're not supposed to talk about that happened
Right.
5 years ago?
Right.
Oh, no. You can talk about it now. Google totally apologized. They said
Yeah.
that, it was the Biden administration made them do it. It's totally not their fault. But, Brandon, that's got me thinking about it, too, now that I'm looking at the kind of the storylines through a critical lens. It's not just the protagonist either, right? Because you're kind of... especially because this is the character arc. You follow them. You're the fan, right? So you kind of feel like you get to know insert character because I've seen them on the entire show,
Agent
right? And so-
Johnson.
yeah, sure, Agent Johnson, right? And so it's like as you get to know him or her, and then you see their paradigm evolve, and you're supposed to feel a certain way, and you're supposed to follow along with them. But it's not just the protagonist. Like also look at the antagonists that they put against them, right? And the people that now you're supposed to demonize that and demonize that worldview and everything. I remember one clip came out. This had to be, man, don't quote me on the time, but I think I saw it somewhere around between like 2022 and 2023, and this was like one of those medical shows, right? So like ER kind of world that we're living in right now, right? And it's like doctor goes in looking at a chart and it's a transgender kid on the bed, and he like walks in, he reads the kid's name, and he's like, I was like, all right, so we're here for, and then all of a sudden the babysitter has to like, doc, can I talk to you in the hallway? And then lectures the doctor about misgendering the kid and how bad would he, and then the doctor's like, oh my God, you're totally right. How insensitive of me. I was like watching that and I'm like, I have worked in many hospitals. That is not at all how that conversation would go. Not even like, well, like, do you know how in debt I am for going to medical school and then becoming a surgeon? And you're going to tell me like, that isn't, but that's the social programming that you're supposed to take away from it. Oh my God, if even that doctor can look at that and have empathy and understand, then I guess I'm supposed to too.
Right.
Maybe I'm the one that's wrong. Maybe I'm the one that doesn't understand.
Right, and if you look at the timeline that I was talking about with the end of the real masculine programming in reality television, to in reality TV getting like Vanderpump Rules and all these other kind of squishy sort of gooey female targeted shows where the dudes are kind of the dorks and the foils for everything. You also see that in scripted programming. That's when you started seeing that trend of dads being just total doofuses who who were the butt of every joke. So that to me, that is kind of like the transition that we're seeing now, and I kind of feel like we might be moving out of that a little bit. I'm hoping because we hit this one part where all the chicks are beating everybody up. You got this chick who's like 5'3", a $105, and she's beating up this giant Russian dude. And it's like, okay, I know that I'm watching something scripted, and I got to suspend a little bit of disbelief, but this is it's a step too far.
Yeah,
It is. I agree. Well, have you heard about Apple postponing the release of their TV show, The Savant? Have you seen that, Tom?
No, I haven't.
So The Savant is a TV show. Jessica Chastain essentially is an online personality, but she's going into these extremist groups. So kind of like we were just talking about with Discord, and she's infiltrating them and trying to extract information and use it as a way to stop school shootings. Is sort of the impetus behind the show. But they've postponed it because of the implication in the show is that the extremism is right-wing extremism, and Apple feels like it may not be the appropriate political climate at right now to do it. But that to me is the perfect example of what we're talking about, where the inspiration for this TV show is a 2019 Cosmopolitan article. Well, what was going on in 2019? Everybody hated Donald Trump. He was a Nazi. He was the ultimate threat to democracy. MAGA is a bunch of right-wing extremist terrorists, and then you have all this stuff, right? And to me, the fact that they've postponed this, it doesn't seem like altruistic. Well, we don't want to add to the fire because of the political climate. It seems a lot more like, well, a lot of what we have seen is not exactly what we're about to represent. It's kind of the other side, and maybe putting this out would be putting our foot in our mouths. I mean, what do you think?
I I think you're right. I think right now the tide has turned as far as the whole both sides argument. Even the normies aren't buying that now. After Charlie Kirk's assassination, you had the Catholic kids killed while they were in church, and now you have this one. It's the timing isn't right. It kind of I remember when the movie Civil War came out, and I think there was a bit of a delay on that one, and I think it was kind of like similar circumstances. And if you've seen that, then you know who were the baddies, and who were the rightful and just people, being the news media trying to get the story.
Dude, it was so predictable. Yeah.
I still wish that they would have filled in the script just a little bit and figured out how in the hell Texas and California rallied together, because they just kind of like dropped you in the middle of that. And I'm like, I want to know how you got from A to X on that point.
We had this conversation, and I'll say it again. It logistically makes the most sense for those two states to pair up. Ideologically, they may seem far apart, but Texas and California are both way more purple than people realize. They're both highly agricultural states, and their economies could survive on their own without the rest of the United States, 100%. If you look at it on paper like that, and you look at it through that perspective, it makes a hell of a lot of sense for these two massively population-dense states with the agriculture and economies to sustain themselves to align, and rather than going to war with one another. That's the way I view it as. But they don't explain that. That's just Brandon's assumption,
Right.
And your two population centers being San Francisco and Los Angeles, and a little bit of San Diego, but San Diego is kind of a weird place. I wouldn't put that San Diego in the category of LA and San Francisco. But if you want to eliminate, if they're going to team up with California or secede or whatever, all you have to do is shut the lights off there. People, they'll thin themselves out. That won't be a problem for you.
A week later, and you will have no problem with that, because the grocery stores will have been taken over by the homeboys down near San Diego and Hemet. And then everybody else in Northern California will have figured out how to take over all the grocery stores in Sac and San Francisco. And then a week later, that'll be about it. Yeah, 100%. I agree. Well, and you remember, too, when Obama was president and there's all these investigations come out. He threw John Kiriakou in prison for whistleblowing, even though he was sort of cleared by George W. Bush for what he whistleblew on. And we started seeing this turn in the opinion of the global war on terror. A lot of the support that the military had was starting to become unpopular, and you saw this string of movies come out. Like, you remember Stop Loss? That was something, and obviously Stop Loss is a real thing, and it happened to a lot of people. But then there was that movie with Kristen Stewart, the chick from Twilight, where she was in the army and she was some sort of dissenter. And there's a couple other movies that came out kind of around that time with soldiers doing things they weren't supposed to do as sort of this like anti-hero in the movie. And it 100% matched the sentiment going on with how, the GWAT was terrible, even though Obama was droning the shit out of people, and nobody really talked about that until after he wasn't president anymore. But it became that the military itself was the bad guy, so to speak, because of the awareness now of the lie of weapons of mass destruction, the awareness now from whistleblowers like John Kiriakou about torture programs, about poppy fields and heroin, all this other stuff coming out. And now, the military is just this arm of the man and blaming them rather than blaming the actual apparatus, right?
Right, and that's part of the demoralization campaign for males in the country. And it was to say, oh, you don't want to join these guys. They're a bunch of thugs. They're rogue. They're doing all this bad shit all over the world. You don't want to be a part of this. You just want, go to college and just, take the safe route there. And they're trying to breed out risk out of young males. And what better way to breed out risk is to say, hey, this is too dangerous. But these are people you don't want to be associated with. This. Look what they've done before.
It does make me wonder.
That's a good point, man.
And we talk about it all the time, right? Does life imitating art or art imitating life?
Right.
And I do go back and forth constantly on how proactive I think Hollywood and the entertainment industry is versus how reactive they are and just trying to capitalize on something that's happening. And I think both happen to an extent. But it starts getting hard to argue with the points that you're making, Tom, especially when you see, like, I was so excited. Top Gun Maverick. Oh, we're going back to something patriotic. This is going to be awesome. And then all of a sudden I wake up and it's like, hey, we just bombed the shit out of Iran and it was awesome. And then they start showing you, like, the mission that they did. And you're like, that was Top Gun Maverick, which really was just the Death Star, but still, like...
Right.
Was that movie made to get people ready for that coming up? It starts being hard to argue with stuff like that.
Well, I'll tell you this much from my own personal experience. When I did the show Profiles from the Front Line in Afghanistan, I was hired and they said, hey, you're going to be the first embedded cameraman with the United States Army in Afghanistan. And I was like, cool. And so with a week to go before I was supposed to go up to Fort Benning and meet up with the dudes and then fly over, I get a call saying, well, change of plans. We're going to have you go out with the Navy first. And I'm like, the Navy? What am I going to do with the Navy? And they're like, well, we're going to put you on the USS Way City.
Condoms.
Yeah, exactly. You're gonna be with the USS Way City and their boarding team, and you're gonna board ships coming in and out of Iraq. And I'm like, what's going on here? The fight is in Afghanistan, and now I'm boarding ships for the boarding team, looking for, banned oil and figs and all this other shit that were leftovers from. It was figs. They couldn't. Iraq couldn't export figs, so they would arrest these ships that had like contraband figs. It was the weirdest thing.
Weird.
But the whole idea, and now that I look back on it, was it was predictive programming. It was setting up the Iraq invasion because this was 2002. And so what the State Department, where the Department of Defense was looking for some more evidence that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction or had vehicles coming in from foreign countries, and he was prepping for anything that they could find to draw a line from Bin Laden and Al Qaeda back to Iraq. So that
wasn't there a section of Profiles from the Front Line that was running around with 19th Special Forces Group? I think it was 19th or 20th. I think it was one of the National Guard groups.
It was. I was with OD 361.
Hey.
ODA 361.
Heck yeah. I was going to say, it's kind of funny in the community when they saw the National Guard group guys running around and those videos came back and they were in cut-off tees and they cut their pants off to turn them into shorts. And they're just walking around with, like, MP5s. Yeah, there was a lot of, like, we look back on it. And the crusty old guys, they have the those were the days, like, looks on their faces, they get real nostalgic for it. Then the young guys are like, why can't we do that? Like, what happened to Special Forces?
Because you're a bitch. And we weren't, right?
You know what's crazy about that story? Just real quick. So the first fire base I was at when I was with ODA 361 was in Orgun, Afghanistan. And then we went out to Deh Raoud. We went down to Kandahar and then up to Deh Raoud. And after that, I did a couple of different shows for Discovery Channel. One was called 2 Weeks in Hell, which is SFAS. And yeah, man, I was there for hash browns. And I also did another show called Surviving the Cut, where we went to Special Forces Dive School down in Key West, which nobody knows that there's an Army base in Key West, Florida. Nope. I didn't know until I got there. But the weird thing is, so when I was doing 2 Weeks in Hell, we're out, me and the three other camera guys I was working with, we were at a bar. I ended up hooking up with the waitress there. And,
don't tell me you went to Charlie Mike's, dude.
It probably was. Because she was convinced that we were either Delta or SF. And I'm like, no, we're filming a show here. And she's like, no, I know better. You guys are all dressed up and blah. I'm like, no, I'm telling you, we're working for Discovery Channel. Anyways, she goes, hey, I know an SF guy. And how many SF guys are there? Thousands, right? Thousands? Past, present.
Yeah.
So, and I go, okay, who do you know? And she goes, Stan Harriman. And I was like, I almost fainted because I was at Camp Harriman in Orgun, Afghanistan.
Oh.
Wow.
Stan was one of the first KIAs in Afghanistan. And then when I went to Trumbo Point, the SF dive school, did you go to dive school, Chris?
I did not. Nope.
So I'm at dive school, and inside my room, they have pictures of dive classes. And, there's a bunch of rooms there. And since, we're filming 24/7 just about, we live there. And so in the room, I started looking at the names and the pictures and everything. In the room that I was staying in, there was a guy named Pete Tice. I was at Firebase Tice in Dehraoud, Afghanistan. It was just the weirdest coincidences after being there and then, seeing that
That's
chick.
trippy, man.
It's one of the things that you can't really communicate to people outside of the military, like how tight it gets. And then when you go from the big military to special operations forces, like the circles just get smaller and smaller. And I was going to say, it's so hilarious that you said you worked on that show, because back when I was a young soldier surviving the cut, I would watch that on rerun, dude. And I'll just out myself, man, because I thought it was badass. And I had certain episodes that were my absolute favorites, and I would go through them, and I would just pump myself up, because it's like, dude, I want to do that. I want to get ready to do that. And the really funny thing about it is, I'm not going to out him at all, but there is a young staff sergeant in the CDQC episode that when I arrived to my first unit in the Special Forces group that I'm in now, he was the ops NCO for my first company that I was in. And I walked in the room and I saw him and I saw the name, and I was trying to put two and two together where I knew this guy from. And we ended up talking for like a week. And then I was like, that name. And then finally it dawned on me, and I had to go back and pull up my Amazon subscription. I'm going through and I'm like watching, I'm like, there he is. He was at CDQC and surviving the cut, dude. So, yeah, the circles get smaller and smaller, and the deeper you go in the military. Yeah,
Right. It goes back to the programming. That was at the height of Iraq is when we did that. So they're looking for more guys to join up, and what better way to show the selection process for getting into SF.
Make it look cool.
You said hash browns.
Yeah.
That guy is military famous, dude.
I was gonna ask you, since you were part of this group of people that went in right around the time the war was starting, did you happen to meet or know anything about like the whole Generation Kill thing, the Rolling Stone guy that went in to Iraq with the Marine Corps?
Is he the one that later died?
He did.
Yeah. Well, God, Christopher, was it Christopher?
I think it is Chris something. Here, I'll find the info real fast for you.
He was he was the one who printed the off the record interview with Stanley McChrystal, and his car was going like 150 miles an hour down Highland, which is like impossible, and then hits a tree and just like disintegrates into a ball of fire, which is really weird.
The person I'm thinking of is Evan Wright.
Oh no,
that's the Rolling Stone reporter guy. Just curious, because that's sort of like the other direction, right? The report or the article that he wrote about the war was sort of the exact opposite. Yeah, no. So this says he died in July of 2024 from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, is what he said. It says right here. In 2024. That's too bad. I didn't realize that happened.
Yeah, I didn't know.
No, just because you were talking about the predictive programming, and it made me think about Generation Kill, and the article that the Rolling Stone guy wrote about definitely wasn't like propaganda. It was what the Army and the Marine Corps and all them were very upset to hear about, and like the reality on the ground of bad officer corps leadership, and all sorts of bullshit going on. But I was just curious if you had any inside track on that. So.
No, yeah,
no worries, man.
Ours, since we were embedded with the military, it was like kind of like the people that they knew. There was a guy, I don't know if he's still alive, because when Afghanistan fell, he got taken prisoner, but he had lived in Afghanistan since 1979. This dude, Peter Juvenile, who had been in the British military and moved to Afghanistan to cover the war with the Russians. And I actually stayed at his house, which he bought from Osama bin Laden. And,
no shit, dude.
Yeah, which is really weird.
That's wild.
But we had a lot, like one of the producers that I worked with who stayed back at Bagram, he had been Christian Amanpour's producer, and he was, she had written this op-ed about something, and he's like, media is totally full of shit. He's like, the Emmy that she won, that she's referencing, I wrote that story for her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was my first kind of, even though my background had been in local television, it was my first, introduction to network news. And then the sound guy that I worked with was a black South African, and he had worked for BBC, and he had covered the genocide in Rwanda, and also what was it, Operation Restore Hope with the Black Hawk Down in Somalia. And he actually ended up surviving an ambush while he was in Somalia trying to get to the airport. So when I first linked up with everybody, I was like, holy shit, I'm feeling kind of weird about my credentials. I filmed a lot of domestics, but, you guys are talking genocide and Civil War and stuff. So
right.
It was quite the baptism by fire with those guys.
Sure.
Did you feel like you were kind of the only one noticing a lot of this predictive programming going on? Were the other people that you were working with kind of realizing that they were being taken for a ride and producing free government propaganda for them?
I don't think I don't think at the moment, because the way that, well, Chris, you know this, the way SF works, and Brandon, you know this too. It's unconventional warfare. So a lot of what we were doing and filming with them were a lot of these meetings that we'd sit down and have tea and everything, and be like, it's very, it started off very sort of cordial, and then by the end of it, it turned into one of the guys on the team going, I know there's a cache of weapons behind that wall there, and we will kill everybody in this room unless we get those weapons. Like, holy shit, what just happened? But it never came to that. They always ended up getting what we needed. But to me, it was just more about showing what exactly, not exactly, but what specifically Green Berets do, which I don't think people were very familiar with what they did. I wasn't. I was shocked to show, to go out on missions with them, and dudes are wearing jeans and, and a chest rig, and, and they're like, it was funny. They're like, you want to go on a mission with us? And I was like, yeah, that would be great. And they're like, okay, here's a chest rig, wear this, and you're going to be the bullet bitch. So if we get into a scrap, you're going to have the extra rounds for
Human
us.
Shield. Yeah.
The bullet
And then
bitch.
they gave myself and my sound guy AKs, which we didn't use, but they're like, if we start
Sad face.
firing, you fire in the same direction until we tell you to stop. So
Yeah.
that was the deal that we made to go out on missions with them. But I really enjoyed that aspect of unconventional warfare. I was drawn to them and their personalities, because a lot of my career has always been based on sort of unconventional thinking when it comes to storytelling. So on a weird sort of level, we both, myself, my sound guy, and the members of the team shared the same sort of thought process. So it was easy for me to fall in with those guys and follow them around.
That's awesome. That's a pretty unique perspective for somebody when you look at everything else you've done to have that experience on top of it, and then to wind up working around people in Hollywood. That had to be such a juxtaposition in thought process. You see your face, yeah? When did that ontological shock set in that you weren't, around people like that anymore?
You're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there were smatterings of it here and there, but thinking back to that time in Hollywood and LA, everybody was still cool with each other. If you were, if you were a Republican or a Democrat, it was still kind of like, oh, he's kind of silly. He likes guns and that sort of thing. It wasn't like it is now. So everybody just kind of got along. You were all friends, even though that you may not see eye to eye on things. And it wasn't until Donald Trump got elected when everything just changed. That everybody's sense of humor that was on the left just went away. And it was like, you have to take this seriously. This is a threat to national security. We can't have him in office and this and that. It's like, at the time I was shit posting all over Facebook about, just digging at everybody that I knew that was, a leftist. And then the next thing that I realized, I was like, you know what? My phone's not really ringing anymore. Holy shit.
Oh, boy.
Something's going on here. And it's like, all right, well, I guess, the shit posting is over with. We better just kind of tamp it down. But yeah, it wasn't until then, before, everybody just sort of got along in some sort of way. It was more about like on Amazing Race or any kind of like adventure show. Politics didn't matter. It was who could run faster and get the shot before the other guy did. It was more competitive in that sort of a masculine type arena where, when things started going, a bit softer in the 2015s and, I would even say 2013s, that's when, I noticed that a lot of people that I had worked with, a lot of men started menstruating. And it was like, what is going on here?
Oh my God.
I'm interested, Tom, based on your perspective and being on both sides of the camera and also kind of on both sides of history shaping events. Do you think, because I describe our modern culture, I've been describing it lately on Twitter as a subscription based clickbait fueled culture that we live in. And being the way that the internet fuels traffic, right? It's always the more sensational, the more contrarian, the more clicks. That's what the algorithm feeds, right? As long as it's also politically correct. Do you even think the media, and I'm specifically narrowing in on, let's say, like the news media, what is supposed to be unbiased sources, do you even think they're capable of having integrity and telling the truth anymore? Or is everything always a story with a narrative?
Everything is a story with a narrative. There's no more, unbiased reporting. That's out the window. Even when I was working in local TV news, this would have been back in 1994. And I can remember the news director coming in during our morning meeting and telling the reporters and anchors and producers that if there's a crime that's committed in South Bend, Indiana, or within the county where South Bend is, if the only description that we have is the person's race, don't say it unless they're white. And to me, that was sort of the beginning of this kind of, bias that we see. It's bias by omission. And to me, the most important thing in a crime to get out there is not to point fingers at who did it, but to catch the guy. And a description is very important. You can't say, oh yeah, this guy in a white shirt and blue jeans ran off. Okay. Yeah. Is there anything else that you could add to that could possibly help the victim's family, get some sort of justice? So that's kind of where it started. Of course, the repealing of the Smith-Mundt Act and being able to propagandize the American public, that was a big one, because once that happened, everything has been off the table since then. And also, too, one thing I do want to bring up is, how do I know when I'm being deceived by the media? Because a lot of times it's by omission, but other times it's by footage. And I think that one of the biggest deceptions ever is, no matter where you fall on January 6th, the thing that got me the most about it being some sort of setup or prior knowledge, not only the fact you have Capitol Police opening doors and walking people through, those little rope lines and everything, which seems a bit obvious to me, is also when you have the crowd that's heading toward the Capitol, you have a reverse angle. You're not going to get that reverse angle unless you want that camera there. You look at the storming of Normandy, when all the footage that we see of it is always from the perspective of the landing craft, because you can't get to where the Germans are to get that reverse angle, or else she'll be dead. It's the same thing to me in a situation like this, or any kind of, in the situation of Jan 6th, or look at other situations when you have, ICE and people gathering around the vans and everything. You never see the POV over the ICE agent's shoulder because you can't breach behind them. So it's always going to be toward them. It's little things like that. When I was watching January 6th, I was like, this is a sham. And again, I would notice this because I notice it in other reality shows when I know if a reality show is faking something, like if it involves police or military, if you get that reverse angle, you're faking it. This is all a lie. I'm watching a lie right now.
Yeah. Well, like when you think about something like January 6th and you just described it, you have the perspective of somebody who's produced shows like this, that when you're going for effect, you want people to feel the most emotion in this scene because this is meant to be the culmination of something or whatever. So when you're watching things, you probably scrutinize them through that lens anyway, right?
Oh yeah, all the time. And there's certain things too that I also look for. If something looks too clean, or if something looks too sloppy, it looks like they're doing it on purpose to give it that sense of reality. A lot of times, if it's a professional cameraman doing something, it'll look fake because they know what they're doing. They've relaxed their breathing. They're holding the camera steady, and they're moving very smoothly because they don't want to be accused of getting a shaky shot. So if something is overly shaky, it's like, okay, what are they trying to deceive me into? Because they've got the audio, but I can't match the audio with any picture. So is this a cell phone? Is this a news camera? What device is being used to record this, so I could better understand the situation in getting that shot and what story they're trying to tell.
See, that's really interesting because I've thought a lot about some of these things that have, especially, we'll talk about it, right? Like what happened with Charlie Kirk and all the different angles that we had from that day. There's, I don't know how many, I think they said there was like 3,000 people on the lawn there at UVU, somewhere around there. And there's all these angles because of the cell phones. But then there's the actual cameras that are set up. And, I've seen so many people get online and use this as a vehicle to sensationalize and get views and build a platform. But at the same, and I'm not really talking about these guys, but the thing I am talking about is this idea that this was a created forum for political theater. And when I look at it, I don't see any of these tropes that you're talking about with like January 6th, positioning and, making sure you're garnering the most emotion out of people watching it. Like, I don't see anything like that. When you look at it, do you see anything like that?
Well, with the Charlie Kirk, the one thing that I can't get over with that one is the amount of people were there. It's estimated anywhere between 1,500 and 2,000 people, or maybe more. The footage that we see, I've only seen maybe 5 different camera angles. So my question is, where are the rest of the camera angles? Have they not been posted? What's happened to all that other footage that's out there? And those are the kind of questions that I have. And the other questions that I also have are the security cameras that we're seeing. It just, to me, if I was seeing that security footage back in 1998, I'd be like, oh, okay, that's what I'm supposed to see. Right. But now we live in a day and age where everything, is 4K. So to see grainy footage like that I'm used to seeing, back in the 90s, it doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, it could be. Everybody has different, budgetary, constraints, but, 98 to 2025 is a long time, and technology, I'm here to tell you, camera technology has really changed.
Yeah.
Well, you were saying, trying to figure out, is that a camera crew getting this, or is that an iPhone? It's pretty wild that you have to like really dig into it to figure out like what device is capturing it. But Tom, it's low hanging fruit, but I just want to lob one slow right over the middle of the plate. I'd love to get your take on how the DOJ rolled out the footage of the cell door for Epstein, and that whole like the way that it was rolled out and then edited and then rolled out again.
It was so bad. It was especially Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi, if you're trying to cover up anything, don't send her out there, because she starts talking about how at midnight it resets itself, because you know how old technology is from the 90s. And I'm like,
she made that
right
up.
now she's in the time frame of thinking this is like the early 2000s, so you can blame it on the 90s. She's blaming something that happened 30 years ago. And to me, that's pretty typical if you're trying to be deceptive, because all of us, like myself, who was in his 20s in the 90s, I kind of feel like the 90s were like 10 years ago, when it's actually, 25, in some cases 30 years ago. So she's a little bit older than I am. But that reference, when she made that reference to being 90s technology, I was like, oh, you're being deceptive, because your sense of timing is off, because you're thinking that, 10 years ago is the 90s when it's actually 2015. So that was my first tip off, that jump, and then, people examining the metadata on it. And then all of a sudden, here's, this is the one that doesn't have the cut in it. It's like, really?
Right. Like, she gave you the Y2K explanation, right? Like, make sure your computer is off at midnight on 2000
Right.
and plugged. Yeah, exactly. That was literally the first thing that came to my mind, was like, that is millennial bullshit to sit there. For me, there's no way that prison has an antiquated camera system that's that old. Like, even in some of these extremely old, out in the middle of nowhere Montana ICBM sites have better cameras than that. Then you're going to talk to me about a high security prison in that
It's
way.
the most high security prison in New York,
Yeah.
but they have a guy on staff that has to go around and reset all the VHSs and the cameras between 11:55 and midnight to make sure.
Right. Well, you guys want to hear a good one? And I got this right from the horse's mouth. So back in 1994, I'm a member of the National Press Photographers Association, and they're having one of these meetings in Detroit, and I'm living in South Bend, so I scrape up all the extra money that I have. It's been 93. I drive to Detroit because I want to see the guest lecturer, he's a cameraman for Charles Kuralt, who was a reporter for CBS back in the day, who had this segment called On the Road with Charles Kuralt, and it was like, it aired on Sunday mornings. I'm like, man, this is super cool. These guys ride around in a Winnebago, and they, tell all these cool stories and everything. And so this dude, Izzy Blickman, is the guy who's, was Charles Kuralt's cameraman. And Charles Kuralt also ended up having a whole other family in a different state and all this other weird shit. You could look that up. It's really weird.
Okay.
And so Izzy's talking about how he got, started in the business as a news cameraman, and he was working in Dallas when JFK was shot. And so they get Oswald, back to the police station, and he gets a phone call in the morning from the producer at CBS, and he's like, hey, man, come to the county jail because they're moving Oswald today, and we want to get a shot of him coming in. And Izzy's like, no, man, I'm going to go down to the garage at the city police department and get him coming out. And so they get into this big fight. And the producer's like, if you don't come to the county lockup, you're fired. You'll never work in this business again. The whole 9 yards that you're all used to hearing. So Izzy goes down there. Of course, Oswald comes out. Izzy is the only news cameraman there that gets Oswald getting shot by Ruby. Because there's Izzy, and then there's also a locked-off camera for the live shot for TV. And to me, the intention was only to have that one live shot from the TV. And, of course, you had the still photographers there. But Izzy has the only motion picture of Oswald getting shot. And so his whole, at the end of his speech is like, trust your instincts know best. If I would have listened to the producer, I wouldn't have gotten the shot. I got the shot. So later I was talking to him about, his instincts and this and that. And I was like, well, what did you think? And he's like, dude, you didn't say dude. He's like, it was really strange the way he got shot and how they pulled him back and then rushed him away and then brought him back out and loaded him up and took off. He's like, I can't get that time frame out of my head, that timeline of why they would do that and not get the, he was like, you could tell that he was replaying this thing, 30 years after it happened, of why would they bring him back inside and then bring him outside and then send him off. Which
did he have the inclination that they knew that was going to happen? That's sort of the...
No, he just felt like, he said that he just had this gnawing that he needed to be there. He couldn't put his finger on it. He didn't have any premonition or anything of the sort, but he just felt that he needed to be in the garage to get that shot.
It's really weird. That's interesting that by chance you have something like that, There's a lot of really weird things surrounding the whole JFK assassination. Obviously, one of the ones you had asked me about if I knew who Hale Boggs was, and with the Warren Commission. Could you run that down a little bit for the audience, like what you were talking to me about?
Sure. Hale Boggs was a representative from Louisiana, and he was the youngest member of the Warren Commission. And the Warren Commission, it's another fairy tale. It's like the 9/11 report. Right. And Hale was like, this is all bullshit. I don't believe any of this. He was causing quite the ruckus because you had people like Arlen Specter, you had Gerald Ford, others who were willing to go along and play the game and get what they wanted later on. And Hale really wasn't down with it. But he kind of was like, yeah, okay, maybe I'll go with it, this and that. And so, when Jim Garrison started looking into the JFK assassination, the attorney from New Orleans, there's sort of rumor and kind of like, a wink and a nod that Hale was providing information to Jim Garrison so he could conduct his own independent investigation of it. So after the Warren Commission, Hale is hated by the CIA and the usual suspects there, James Angleton, the Dulles brothers, and they have no love for him. And then he gets up on the House floor and starts going after J. Edgar Hoover. So now the FBI is pissed off at him. So Hale, in, I believe it was 71, flies up to Alaska, where Nick Begich has a highly contested Senate seat, and so Hale goes up there to help him campaign. So they board a private plane in Anchorage to fly to Juneau. Well, while they're on that plane, it disappears and is never found. And at that time in 71, the largest air and sea search has begun, doesn't come up with anything because at that time there are no black boxes or flight recorders or anything like that on private planes. And so to this day, he's still missing. I happen to have a family member who had talked to, and I told my family member about this, who he's friends with Hale Boggs' grandson. And what he believes happened was Nick Begich was having an affair, and she was having an affair with a guy who had ties to the mob, and he believes that a bomb was put on the plane, blew it into a million pieces somewhere over Alaska, and it just all trickled down and went away because she ended up marrying this guy after Begich was pronounced dead. Wow. So the way it kind of like ties up into a neat bow if you're in the intel community, coming back from the Warren Commission and everything. Here you have this guy that's been really mouthy about, J. Edgar Hoover. He disagrees with the findings of the Warren Commission. nobody in the CIA really likes him. So I kind of think it's like, well, we sort of know this is going to happen. Let's just, oh, what's that, squirrel? And it just sort of happens, and you kind of act like you're, trying to see, oh, we put on this giant, search for the plane. It's never been found. And so I just thought that was kind of in another interesting rabbit hole in the whole tale of the JFK assassination.
That kind of reminds me of the Dog and Pony show that we saw when they went looking for that tiny sub that sunk a couple years ago. You remember that, Brandon? And then all of a sudden it came out after the search and everything went through. It was like, oh yeah, we actually had sonar recordings the whole time.
Yeah.
Underwater recordings that it imploded. What was the name of that? I have to look it up now.
Titan, wasn't it?
Yes. Titan Submersible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I live in Jacksonville Beach, right? And my neighbor works for the Navy because you have the Bayport Naval Station there. And he's a sonar guy. And so I was out of town. I came back and I saw him and we started talking about that. And he's like, I was working that day. I was like, did you know what happened? He's like, we all knew what happened. We knew exactly what submersible it was. We knew exactly where it went down. We know a lot that goes on the ocean floor.
Right.
But then again, that was another one of those deception schemes by the media, because you had this countdown clock. Are they still alive? How much oxygen is left? So a total made-for-TV event to do what? To cover Hunter Biden. Remember, that was going on during the same week.
It was, yeah.
Way too much attention for that shit to find out that that's what was going on the whole time, that they already knew that that it had blown up. And then you had the video come out of his wife at like their little command center, and you there's like, I don't know who he is, but some engineer, I guess, out there at the command center. They hear a pop, and they look at each other like, oh, fuck. And then she gets up and walks away, right? And then you have all these people that work for him saying, well, he had this like weird fetish about wanting to be a part of the Titanic forever. His wife is the descendant of one of the Titanic survivors. And he talked about before wanting to, maybe be buried down there at the Titanic. And then it sort of just leads all the way up to this conclusion that, well, maybe he just fucking killed everybody because he didn't want to die alone and went down there in a bunk ass submersible, and knowing full well it was going to blow up, and that he's going to be tied to the Titanic forever now, because there were people who worked for him who were fired, who told him that this shit is not going to work, this shit is not safe, you're storing this thing outside that's meant to be like pressurized and airtight, and it's out here in these crazy changing temperatures and all this other shit that you shouldn't do at all. Like, to me, it just like that was the perfect. It's almost like one of these things we just talked about, Izzy being there when Jack Ruby shoots Oswald, is like perfect timing. They had some fucking kook who wanted to die on the Titanic happen to just fucking die, and the Navy said to somebody, well, I think we actually heard this happen. They're like, shut the fuck up. We're going to run with this, and we're going to put an oxygen countdown clock on all of the news stations for 3 days, and then we're going to make this big thing about, well, they still haven't been found, and now logically they should all have been suffocated to death, and then they figure out that, well, here's the remains of the wreckage and all this other crap, right?
Yep.
Like, that was that neat bow you were talking about. The other thing you were telling me about Hale Boggs too is that you said your brother, Hale Boggs' grandson was your brother's boss, and that you had told him about the situation, which you kind of had outlined, and his grandson said that you were about 97% correct, and that Clinton even maybe drove Boggs to the airport, and that he was 100% at the JFK assassination, though.
Yeah, that was the one that I've heard, that Clinton was actually in Alaska, and he was working as a volunteer for the Democrats, and was one who gave Hale a ride to the airport. So that was the one where he was like, I'm not sure about that one, but he was like, almost 100% that Clinton was there in the same sort of volunteer capacity down in Dealey Plaza. Even though he would have been young, he would have been one of these young Democrats who, that get sort of selected. You know how, I don't know if you guys had it, but in Florida, we had, like, for really smart kids in the school, and it was never me, they would be picked to go and, like, shadow, like, lawmakers up in the House and the Senate in Florida.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I know what you're talking about.
He was one of those types of kids.
Okay.
And you talk about somebody who has been on the radar for a really long time about what we're going to do with you. I think he was one of those guys that was selected.
Well, him and her both, because she's got a huge history with Saul Alinsky and when she came through college. You go back and you start tying that thread, and then the way that the two of them come together and have the picture perfect political marriage with one daughter, and you're just like,
Well, look at the Clinton plane thing too, right? The next person that comes to mind for me is JFK Jr., right? And who was he competing against at the time when his plane went missing? Was Hillary Rodham Clinton, right?
Exactly.
It's just, there's too many coincidences. You can't have 47 people in your circle just wind up fucking dead, and it's just like, well, I guess it's normal.
Everybody knows.
Everybody's got 47 people that died by suicide. Yeah,
I still believe that Chelsea Clinton, her dad is Webb Hubble. I mean, if you ever look at the pictures of yes,
interesting. I'll have to look that one up. What do you? Well, now you said that, it makes me think about the crazy likeness that it is when you hold up a photo of Chester Bennington next to John Podesta. Have you seen that one?
Dude, that is horrifying. That one freaks me out a lot.
Yes, that's
the Podesta brothers scare the shit out of me.
Me too, man. Listen, like that whole Pizzagate thing, I don't think that is total bullshit at all. And the audio that has come out and it circulates every once in a while, I'll see it, and it's John Podesta. It sounds like John Podesta, I should say, allegedly, right? Yelling at a little kid, and some of the things that he says, and the thing, like the reaction that's getting from this child, it's just fucking evil. And then you learn about what Chester Bennington was working on and involved with, and then you realize like Chris Cornell was also kind of a part of this. And then you think about, well, what's that Temple of the Dog song, Hunger Strike, and like what were they talking about? If you go and read the lyrics of Hunger Strike but Temple of the Dog, and then maybe Anthony or Bourdain had something to do with this too, and he just kind of seemed like he had the perfect life and killed himself. And it's just like there's all these really weird things that seem to touch one another, but not enough to where you can actually draw a line through all of it. And it makes for great conversation, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, you're talking about human trafficking and sex trafficking and kids and all this other shit, and it's just like, maybe, you don't know. It's pretty wild.
Oh, it's extremely wild. And when you start talking about it to normies, like your family, at least my family, is like, you should probably seek some help, because we're not actually seeing the pattern that you're seeing here, which is the hardest part about conspiracies, because for a lot of us, we can connect the dots and we can see the pattern that's going on, and also say, okay, I know that there's something missing to this, but once we get up here, it seems like this next step, even though I don't have proof of it, it's going to be right there. Because always with the conspiracy, it's like you open one door and you're like, okay, this one will open, and it doesn't. And then it just ends there. And for most of these conspiracies or these plots that are going on, they're all designed that way. And I mean, you guys know this in the military world, everything is so compartmentalized. It's the same way that it is, in television as well, in production. If I'm out in the field, I have no idea the decisions that are being made by the executive producers. And then I know that they're making some decisions, but I'm not sure how they arrive at those decisions. There might be 5 executive producers, but 2 of them may break off from the other 3 and make a decision, and then say, when they get together, oh, we're going to do X well, we're going to do X, but these two decided that we're going to do Y. So when it filters down to me, Y is what we have to do. And so you have these other three going, oh, we didn't know they were doing Y. You know, they have deniability over it. And then the other ones were like, well, I thought we talked about this in the meeting, even though that they knew what exactly was going to transpire. And it's the same. I would guess it would be the same thing in the military, the spy community, government, everything else.
Well, I've talked about this a lot recently. I even put something on my social media today about how you can't use the lack of information as a set of evidence for anything. And what we were talking earlier at the top of this conversation about Discord and things like that being used as a way to manipulate people, and that the government maybe even invented things to reach out to and develop its own pool of delectables to go and manipulate into doing other things. Well, you start looking at the way that narratives are pushed, and they collect all of this information that doesn't quite fit together, and they leave you to speculate with it. And that's what the news does very, very well. And so it's like the government is an expert in sophistry and this idea of presenting information without all the information. I honestly think that they let certain things I do think that there is truth to Pizzagate, because there are things that are that bad that have been proven true. Like the episode that we're doing, or that's dropping this weekend, is with a UN whistleblower and the food for sex scandals that have gone on with UN workers. Like, that's just as bad, right? With some of this stuff. But I think that they allow a lot of these conspiracies to permeate, because it does just keep the water muddy, so to speak, murky. Because you now are intrigued by it, and you're out filling in your own gaps, and now you've got 500 people saying, well, this is what I think it is, and this is what I think it is, and that guy's full of shit, and you're full of shit, and it just becomes this giant fucking clusterfuck of crap, and no one ever gets to the bottom of it, is what I think happens. And that's the bigger, I think that's like the biggest psyop, is to allow information to exist in an incomplete form and just destroy the actual evidence, right?
Yeah, there's so much deception involved with all of this, and it's trying to, it's trying to push people into a corner to believe the narrative. Nobody wants to feel like the one that they're the sort of like the fringe person. They want to, human beings, like to be in groups or whatever. I've been very comfortable just being sort of a fringe dweller and falling through the cracks. That's all right by me. But for the most part, people don't like to be ostracized like that. And when it comes to Pizzagate, I'm with you. There's more to it than what we're being told. And then right away we hear, when you bring it up, it's like, oh, that's been debunked. But then when you bring up the person that debunked it, James Gordon Meek, who he's the one who first came out against it and said, oh, this is a bunch of bullshit, this and that. He's also the one that does the documentary in Niger where the SF operators get killed. And guess what? They find child porn on his computer, and now he's in prison. Yep.
Well, it's stuff like that if that's a coincidence, it's a hell of a fucking coincidence for the person who came out and said Pizzagate was bullshit. And that's how this stuff happens, because maybe it is real. Maybe he made some anti-propaganda against it because he knew it was reality. And then too, you see the guy who at again with the Charlie Kirk shirting, who was like, it was me, right? And I did it. And he was asked about it. He's like, well, I did it because I wanted the real guy to get away. And then they found CP on that guy's phone or whatever it was.
And then we found out that this guy was supposedly at Ground Zero during 9/11.
Right.
And he keeps showing up all over the place. And then, yes, there's CP on. It's the same thing with Paddock's brother. He's like, hey, man, I don't think my brother, is involved the way that you say he is. And guess what they find on his computer?
Whoa.
Definitely see a pattern.
Right, and the thing with that is also really weird with Stephen Paddock's brother is that OS was like Windows 95. And the amount of CP they said they found on his computer, there's just no fucking way that much shit was on there. It's like
there was like 2 terabytes or something.
Right. It's like, bro, that doesn't even exist for a home PC, right, at the time. Like, you just the fact that let's talk about the Stephen Paddock thing for a second, okay? Because this is actually one of the episodes that is our most successful episode. We talked a lot about Stephen Paddock. And my official, like, what I think happened, and I'll just say again, like, I don't know because all of the information hasn't been filled in. You're right. Yeah, my computer will, or my camera will zoom in on my face really fast. But my guess on hunch in this is that Stephen Paddock has ties to the military industrial community. He ran a bunch of books for, I think it was Lockheed Martin, even though he has no actual financial management or budget management skills or like schooling for it at all. I think that he was running guns and he was known to be a high roller in Vegas anyway. He brought all this shit there. You look at the fact that in his room, or the hallway down near his room before the shooting, it was reported that there was a gunshot coming from that room that the police did not investigate, that the hotel security said they investigated, but there's no camera footage of them investigating it. And then you look at the lock system that the hotel used, and I was military police in the Air Force, you know, and part of that is security. And I've used all different kinds of like security software with door locks and, you know, alarm systems and all this other shit. And so like, I understand faults. I understand false alarms, you know, and nuisance alarms and all this other stuff and like how they're tracked and how they're used and everything. And you look and say, well, this door was tampered with from the inside, and these two doors on opposite ends of this giant room were tampered with exactly at the same time. How could one person do this? Like there's no way he could stretch his arms out, even if he did try to stretch his arms out. And then there's a video that I have saved on my phone because I only ever see it every once in a while and then it'll disappear. But it's the police that are up responding to the active shooter, and they're in the room supposedly, and they're like, there's no window broken here. And they're talking about how there's no window broken. And then in the episode I did, we show a bunch of footage from cell phones that were on the ground from the LasVegasMap.com, which is like the world's greatest fucking thing ever if you want to learn about the Las Vegas shooting. And there is a helicopter hovering over the hotel with rounds coming out of the helicopter. Like, to me, Stephen Paddock was running guns for the Saudis, and he got fucking popped once his usefulness was done, and that's what happened. That's what I think. Well, why did they kill all those people at the concert? Well, I think that they killed all those people at the concert because it's a wonderful distraction if you're the Mossad trying to kill the fucking Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, right? Like, they don't care.
Who just happens to be there.
Who just happens to be there. Like, and not to mention, there's all these other phone calls from other hotels, from the whatever Sundance helicopters, which is off the apron of the helicopter, or the Las Vegas airport, calling in an active shooter in the parking lot. And just so happens that the helicopters from Sundance turn off their transponders and they turn them on again, like conveniently away from the location. There's just like, that doesn't prove anything, but it says a lot, right? Like,
yes.
It's just, there's so much fucking gnarly shit with that. And then the FBI was like, well, there's no motive, and he just did it, and the motive we're going to come out with 3 years later, and all these other people, to and include the lawyer representing the country music artist whose name escapes me that was there at the time, and then all these other people is dead, and so are all of these other witnesses that came forward. They're dead, and so is the security guard who supposedly was wounded. He died within a week too, like all these other key witnesses. Like, that, it's just like that could be a freaking Clancy novel.
Oh yeah, you've got a running gun battle that's going up the strip to,
literally.
Mandalay Bay is at the furthest end of Las Vegas Boulevard, and you see the timeline of the 911 calls and the body cam footage, and it's all the way up, like, past like the Bellagio,
Right.
almost getting to Fremont Street. Yeah, it's just there's a lot more to it. And then, the FBI talks to the girlfriend who goes to, she's given 150 grand by him, goes to the Philippines. Then you have, there's something up with the Philippines, and I'm not quite sure what it is, because then you have, I hate to, go down another rabbit hole, but you got Terry Nichols from the Oklahoma City bombing who makes multiple trips to the Philippines.
Right.
So what's going on there that,
money laundering,
is attracting these dudes who, this guy, is supposedly, really good at video poker, and this other guy we really don't know, Terry Nichols, where he gets any money from. We still have no idea who paid for the bomb materials. You have two unemployed dudes. Where are they going to come up with the money to even rent the truck?
Yeah.
Well, that's another pattern right there that you guys are pointing out between Stephen Paddock, Terry Nichols, and then, the one that we all keep talking about lately because it was in the news till all of, the things that have happened over these past few weeks, and nobody's been talking about it anymore. But when you have this guy that seems to come out of nowhere and then all of a sudden has vast wealth, connections, and is able to, move and shake and all this international travel, that should be a thing that automatically starts sending up red flags to anybody.
Especially a country like the Philippines, like banking and stuff like that. It's not as regulated. And it is a hotbed for seedy people in general, because whether you're going there for like a sexcation, which a lot of people do, or you're going there because you're looking to purchase something illegally, or you're looking for the Philippines to be a conduit in between two other countries as a means to ship something. Like there's all these other things that you can use the Philippines for. But then
they have very loose ports with almost no security and the ability to reflag ships.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was meaning with using that country as like a conduit in between other countries. But the thing with Terry Nichols and the Murrah building bombing, the truck that was used is a Penske truck, wasn't it? It was one of the Penske truck had been seen at that location the day before. And it almost looked like there was a dry run, and somebody made the report to the news or the police department about how they saw somebody drive up in the very similar or the exact same, couldn't write down to the license plate, but exact same looking Penske truck up to the building, and people got out. They walked around. They looked like they were doing an inspection and then disappeared. And then that Penske truck was also seen on whatever the military installation, the Army National Guard installation that's near Oklahoma City. That same Penske truck was seen parked at the actual vehicle bay there at the base. And it's just there's all these really weird things. And then the agents that were involved at Ruby Ridge were also there at the David Koresh Branch Davidians thing in Waco. And then, oh, by the way, some of the FBI guys were also involved in the investigation post Timothy McVeigh, who came out and said, I'm not what you think I am. And depending on whether or not you want to believe him and his statements or not, but there's just, I don't know what, when I think of things like that, I ask myself this question: what is the point?
The point of the deception?
Mm-hmm. Well, to what end is the deception being perpetrated?
Well, I got to think back to 1995 when it happened. I'm working in TV news at the time. And so this comes on the heels of Waco. And so the big thing that's going on is everyone's talking about, in local media are gun shows and how, militias are taking over, and there's a lot of, anti-government stuff happening. So my thought is, if this is the narrative that's being pushed, and this is pre-Oklahoma City bombing, so if this is what I'm seeing and these are the stories that I'm covering, now in retrospect, because at the time, I'm 24 years old. I don't know shit about anything. I can barely get out of bed and get my clothes on and go to work. That's how little I know about life.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'm just taking the government's word for it. Okay, this must be a problem. Now that I look back on it, I think, is this something that existed or came about organically, or did we have feds that were involved with this to make it look like something, that was happening organically. And I kind of feel like the latter is true. I feel like there was a narrative that needed to be pushed about anti-government organizations, because this all goes back to disarming the populace. Mm-hmm. And I think this was kind of like their way of getting into getting new legislation passed and ultimately banning guns, because before that you had Ruby Ridge, which led into Waco, which led into Oklahoma City bombing. So if I'm running a program at the federal level where I'm trying to get these supposed separatists or whatever militia type people, I've got to infiltrate them somehow. And there's a good book called Blowback, written by this woman who spent 30 years researching this. And she was a former producer at America's Most Wanted, and she goes into great detail about this bank robbery gang called the Aryan. It was an Aryan bank robbery gang, and that's and they had this one guy who came into this gang. He came from Germany and started talking about you need to take up arms against the government, blah blah blah, all this other stuff. So guys like him and others who are peripheral people. There was also that guy in Arizona. I don't know if you remember him. His name's escaping me right now. He had long hair, kind of a thin beard. He was friends with McVeigh and Nichols. But he ended up skating. This German dude ends up going back to Germany. The feds don't want anything to do with him, which leads you to believe that he's some sort of asset for the feds. But one of the things that I can't get over with the whole Terry Nichols, and this is how, to me, is total gaslighting, is we have video of John Doe number 2 getting out of the truck, and nobody ever mentions that. It's like, I can see him. Mm-hmm. I can see him right there. Right. That's not Timothy McVeigh. That's somebody else you never identified, and now you're telling me never existed, but I see him.
Right.
And, it's 30 years removed from that. And so people are just like, they've bought the narrative. It was Timothy McVeigh, Terry Nichols, somehow these two guys who didn't have jobs rented this truck, built the bomb, and then detonated it because they were mad over Waco. And that's the narrative.
And McVeigh is an Army vet.
Yeah.
Which adds to it. I think you're onto something with that, because I do think that there's obviously, it's been proven that the government had planned and has had plans for false flags in the past. And I also think that like the introduction of specific drugs into communities was on purpose as well. You look at the difference between what drugs were used in the 60s and 70s. They were all these happy hallucinogenic drugs that like people they just wanted to fuck and do drugs and sleep all day. And then you hit the 80s and you've got the AIDS epidemic, and what are the drugs? They're these dark, put you in the bottom of a pit, heroin and all these other things that like ruin people's lives. Like, you can, if you do acid every day for the rest of your life, like you're going to be a fucking wacko probably, but eating zucchini bread all day, but you're not ruining your life to the point like in heroin addict does. And then what comes from this, you notice alongside this change in the drugs people use? Well, you see an increase in government control. You see an increase in the release. We see Reagan release all these people from these psycho wards. You see all of these TV programs like propping up police and control, right? Like, and there's again sort of, but not the same as like all those FBI shows. And what does that lead into? Well, the Cold War is going on and ending, and the government is the good guy, and then you've got the Gulf War right after that. So like it's just, I think you start to see the narrative shift from coming out of this civil unrest haze all through the 60s, the 50s and the 60s, really, because of Korea and then Vietnam, and then obviously like the culmination of Vietnam, and everybody's mad, and you have the civil rights movement, and Martin Luther King gets killed, RFK gets fucking killed, Malcolm X gets killed, Medgar Evers gets killed, like all these people you can talk about getting killed, and then you go into this like period with fucking Carter, Iran, and then fucking Reagan, and it's like Reagan bullshits everybody and then bans machine guns and then fucks around and it's just nuts. I think that's what it is like Reagan sort of ushered in this era of like he said the scariest words are I'm from the government and I'm here to help. But like that guy was anything but a fiscal conservative when you look at him policy wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what you just laid out is a story arc. And because you've got a lot of highs and lows to it, which if you're going to, keep an audience enthralled with what you're doing, there's got to be a low point because you need your payoff to be a lot better. And then you also have to dip down back lower because you also need that payoff at the end. You could start with, let's start with the 60s. You had all these hippies who were trying to figure out, we want to overthrow the government. We want more of a communist government. We want to be more socialist or whatever it is. So then what do we have? We have MK Ultra. We have this mind control device. And then what do you have? What's that?
COINTELPRO.
FBI,
Oh yeah, exactly. And so then what do you have? Then you need a boogeyman. So you get Charles Manson and the Manson family, and you get all these whacked out hippies that are on drugs who do these heinous murders. And then it's like, okay, we'll start there, and then you look for other patterns. And then, you start with the Weather Underground in the 70s and their bombings and their terrorist acts. And then you could, if you bring it to now it's a little bit different. I don't think MK Ultra shut down. I think it rebranded into something else instead of LSD. I think there is another cocktail of drugs that are being, either injected or taken by the doctors, just as, you have a hyperactive kid, give him this, but somebody else knowing this could be somebody that we could tap into later on a Discord chat or whatever. So now I feel like you've created this, this next little army of, monsters that you need to defeat. And it seems like it goes in that pattern because now in the plot of the movie that we're living in, we're down at a low. The bad guys, the furries, the furry culture is coming out. They're starting to write on bullets, and all the information's there. Oh, my love and my roommate, you'll never guess what I did.
Right.
I saw that. I was like, bros, you need to hire better writers because that doesn't sound like a dude that's into, a Gen Zer who's into trans dudes. It sounds like a Gen
Full
X
sentences.
pop. Yeah.
Right. With punctuation. Yeah.
Dude, no emojis.
No emoji. Nothing. Yeah. No cute little bear emoji, hey,
couldn't even get an eggplant, dude.
Couldn't even get it. Yeah, right. I was gonna go ahead.
Speaking
Tom,
of,
please.
just real quick about the Clintons, have you heard about Laura Silsby?
Mm-mm.
So after the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, I had met this guy, Frank, down in Delray Beach, Florida, who's a multimillionaire, one of the craziest people I've ever met in my life. He does the Badwater Ultra Marathon every year. He's a multimillionaire. He builds these giant mansions on spec. They sell between, $30 million to $150 million. His office is in a tree house on his property. He's got a rope bridge that leads from the master bedroom to the tree house and shit. And he collects Yugos, right? And
oh my gosh, Yugos, what a weird thing to collect, man.
Yeah. And so he also has a not-for-profit that builds wells for villages in Haiti. So I'm in, unbelievably, and I shudder to say this, but I was in Haiti I was in Disney with my ex-wife and our kids when the earthquake happened, and I was getting, waffles shaped like Mickey or whatever for the kids, and I saw footage of the earthquake, and I knew that my ex-wife would have to go back to work because, in Palm Beach County where we're living, there's a huge Haitian population there, so there are going to be a lot of people who have family members, and plus whenever anything ever happens in Haiti, it's a total catastrophe. There's going to be dead, and at the time there was no telling how bad the damage was. So I got back to the room. She's already packing. She's like, we got to go. So we head down there. She goes into work, and I call Frank, and I'm like, he might be going there. At least I could get some footage of him getting a plane together and, getting supplies. maybe something. And he's like, hey, man, I'm putting together a search and rescue team with the local fire department here. I've got one seat left. Do you want it? And I'm like, yeah, man, I'll take it. So I hopped on a flight with him. He had put together a search and rescue crew made up of, an Air Force reservist nurse, his girlfriend who's a doctor, and then like 3 or 4 guys from the Delray Beach fire department. So we fly over to Port-au-Prince. And at the time, and Brandon, you'll love this. So we're getting ready to land, and the control tower, there's nothing at the airport, right? They had landed these Air Force combat controllers or they parachute in, they grab a picnic table, and they're landing planes, and they've taken total control over it. Yeah. So the pilot, he goes, hey, man, come here. You want to see something cool? And I'm like, yeah. And he shows me the radar. They have at least 30 planes stacked from the deck all the way up until 15,000 feet or 20,000 feet or whatever. I was like, holy shit, I'd never seen anything like that. Yeah. So we ended up landing there, going out on patrol going out, and at the time we got there 27 hours after the earthquake, so it's still a rescue mission. So they pull out some people from the rubble and everything. One of the weirdest ones, it was the last one that we got. It was a Doctors Without Borders hospital. The side of it had totally collapsed down, and there was a guy under the bottom who found a void. He was a patient. The night before the earthquake, he had gotten robbed and stabbed. So this poor bastard goes into the hospital for a stab wound, and all of a sudden during the night, the hospital collapses on him.
Oh, my God.
So they ended up pulling him out of there. And we ended up, after that, the team was so small that it was like, hey, we need to go back because now it's becoming a recovery because we'd been there for 3 days past that 72-hour window. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we head back. So I'm still paying attention to what's going on in Haiti. Mm-hmm. And I noticed this one story. This woman, Laura Silsby, who works for the Clinton Foundation, gets arrested in Dominican Republic going across the border with a van full of children. Orphans.
I have heard this story.
Yes, you told us this story.
That fan that called in that one night because she was talking about the DR and Haiti and about things that had been happening down there, and she brought it up as part of that call-in. It was one of the Friday Night Live Fire call-ins.
You say the guy that I just talked to, the UN guy, the episode you weren't in there, he talked about this too. He went into a lot of detail about that. Now that you've said that, that I've heard. I didn't know who that was her name, but I've heard about this. But go on. Sorry.
Yeah.
So she gets arrested, and then Clinton swoops in, and she's out. Mm-hmm. I don't hear of her for a few years. She turns up again. She's now working for the state of Florida. I shit you not, for Florida's Amber Alert system. She's in charge of missing children in Florida now. See, again, that's that pattern shit that we keep talking about. Mm-hmm. And I keep going back to, you guys brought up the 764. Mm-hmm. Normies have no idea that shit goes on, and if they do, it's so dark and evil that they can't believe it, and they refuse to believe it. A lot of people will refuse to believe it, but sinister and evil shit is out there, and these people, these elites, are into some of the darkest shit imaginable. Yeah. And I would think that they've always have been. If you look back in the Bible or any other sort of ancient texts, they've been doing this for a long time.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. It's so. I was just gonna say it's so gross. Becca told a lot of stories that were terrible, but the worst one to me, like the one that really kind of hit me in the heartstrings, the worst was there's this offshoot of the whole O9A thing. It's called Spawnism. Have you heard of Spawnism? And Spawnism is this idea that you can commit an evil act, and certain evil acts you do if you die in the commensuration of this act, that you respawn. The spawn god will respawn you, or if you take your own life, that you will respawn in a better form. And there was this kid in the United States. He was in a wheelchair and he was groomed online by like one of these spawnist offshoots. And they talked him into killing himself on camera because he believed that if he killed himself, that he would respawn in a body where he didn't need a wheelchair. And I just was like, dude, when she told me that, I was like, that I feel like for obvious reasons, like really hit me in the heartstrings. Because I was like, that's just so fucking sad, man. Like you've convinced this kid with a physical disability that if he kills himself, he's going to come back and not need his fucking wheelchair. Like evil feels like not harsh enough a word for something like that, you know?
You're talking about patterns, Tom, and a few that I've been putting together over here on the left coast is we talked to a guy named Morgan Lorette who has a huge history in working with Blackwater and
he was in Blackwater.
He was, yeah, and some of these paramilitary organizations. And then so he comes on the pod and he talks about how during the Biden administration, Blackwater paramilitary contractors, possibly working for companies like Blackwater. So there, you can't get me. Were moving and trafficking kids over the border, utilizing Biden's open border policies at the time. And during the heyday of this is when Washington State passes a bill which basically stated it was framed under the guise of protecting trans children, right? And so the idea is if you run away from home because your parents are repressive and not allowing you to live your trans identity or whatever, if you come under the custody of person that works for the state, whether it's cops or what have you,
CPS. They
no longer have a duty to report to the parent or legal guardian that they are in custody of the minor. And Seattle, right, is connected to Los Angeles by the I-5 corridor, and this stuff is coming straight up and out of Mexico through Southern California and up to Washington. And at the time, I was railing online about it because I said, you do realize that all you're going to do is make Washington State the child trafficking hub of the United States. You know how fast you could get a kid? And it's also a port of entry. Straight out of SeaTac and anywhere in the world. By the way, straight out of SeaTac and flown straight into Manila, which is a flight that goes every day.
Oh, yeah.
San Francisco does that. LA does that. All these places. Yeah.
These people are evil. That's
Yeah, I mean, you've got Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in a congressional hearing saying, we to the effect of, we've stopped the child trafficking that's been going on with DHS. And I'm like, wait a second. Is there not a follow-up question? That was back when, it wasn't a hearing. He was with Trump, and they had reporters in there, and there wasn't one follow-up question. I was like, what are you fuckers doing? This is a huge story, and you're just like, oh, this is normal. I'm just like, no, this isn't normal. Our government was trafficking children, and nobody has a follow-up question?
Well, it's so weird because things like that you think would be no-brainers that should just elicit all of this outrage. They just don't. And that was one of the things I was talking about with Andrew McLeod, is that this scandal that happened with the UN where these families were coming in and these UN aid workers were like, well, if you want food, then I want your 9-year-old for the night. And they were basically asking the 9-year-old to take one for the team. And then this UN worker, the whole time they're in a camp, is abusing this kid in exchange for food. And he was a whistleblower on this, in this story, especially the one that took place during the first Balkan War. There's one he talked about that they turned into a movie because these kids were trafficked to this nightclub. I think the name of the nightclub was called Florida 2000. But in 2010, they made a movie with Rachel Weisz called The Whistleblower, literally about this incident. It's a true incident, and that movie just didn't do anything in the box office at all, and no one cares. Like, these are kids literally being raped by adult humanitarian aid workers for the United Nations, right? Who was there in Haiti as well during after the earthquake and all these other places, and people are just like, oh well, I don't know if they're just so disaffected because it doesn't affect their everyday lives, but you would think this is just like the thing that everybody would rally behind as like a banner to dismantle all this crap, and it doesn't seem to move the needle.
Not just that, but when you do try to do something about it, then the system punishes you. We have a dude in the community. It's pretty well known story throughout the special operations community. Everybody knows about the Bachi Bazi boys over in Afghanistan and how it's part of the culture and Man Love Thursdays, and that's like, we're all briefed on it when we go over there. But there was, I believe he was in 10th group, but don't quote me on it. There was a Green Beret that was over there, and they knew that the individual key leader that they were working with was doing this on the camp, to the point of, like, you could hear these young men like just being raped and screaming and being abused. And so he went over and he was basically like, you are going to stop do this, like, this does not happen on this camp or we won't work with you anymore. And basically, as the story unfolded, the key leader went over top of the Green Beret's head, got him in trouble, and he looked at one of his teammates, as the story goes, and basically was like, well, if the command isn't going to put a stop to it, like, I'm going to put a stop to it. And one of his teammates is like, I got your back. And they went and they pulled this key leader out of his tent, and they beat the ever-loving shit out of this guy. They beat the shit out of him. And then Green Beret was fired, brought home, and they tried to take his tab.
Of course they did.
Buried by the system for trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, this whole thing with kids and especially with the elites, pedophiles, to me, well, they're all pedophiles, but like the regular ones who like ride around in vans and have, kid clothing in a garbage bag.
Creepy old guy trope.
Yeah.
Right.
That's totally different than I think than the elites, who I think are the main, customers for these kids. And I think when you get to a level of evil where they are, that the thing that I believe they believe it gives them power is to take away innocence and to take away to be able to destroy a child's innocence. And I think that is the one drug that there's nothing else on earth like. And for them, that's the main reason for doing something like that.
Yeah, I think the difference you're talking about is like just the creepy guy who has this repressed urge and goes and does it a secret because it's a crime, and then there's like a ritualistic factor that goes into these other people. And I believe 100% in that, and I think that happens because it's not just an American elite thing or like a modern elite thing. Like this, like you said before, things like this have been going on. The slaughter of children and the sacrificing of children has been going on for a long time.
Doesn't matter if it's Moloch or Planned Parenthood. The devil gets his sacrifices, dude.
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, it's been going on forever. Well, which kind of ties into like your experiences in Hollywood, right? There's a really famous video of like Mel Gibson. I don't know if it's in like the 90s or the 80s because he's got like he's got his Riggs and Murtaugh feathery 80s hair, in this video, and but he's talking about how his perception of what Hollywood is or was when he moved from Australia to the United States was way worse than he thought it was. And at first he's like, I didn't notice it, and he's like, and then you kind of notice it, and then once you're there enough, like, people get comfortable around you and it sort of leaks its way out, and he's like, and then you really start to see the evil for what it is. And I'm paraphrasing what he said, but it's a very profound 5 minutes of him talking about this 30 years ago probably. And I'm just wondering, like, how much of what I was just talking about did you witness in your time in Hollywood?
Well, for myself, being a fringe dweller my entire life, I went to Catholic school. I was an altar boy, and I didn't have one priest hit on me. So I'm used to rejection. Oh, I know that's pretty dark.
Sad face. Yeah, got you.
But I kind of feel like that is that is transferred over into my professional life. When I first started my career being on Cops, I was separated from Hollywood for, the first 5 years of my career. And then after 9/11, I was still living in Florida. And so half of my career was spent not being in Hollywood. So once I did end up landing there, to me, all the groups had been set. And so I found my sort of friend group being other sort of fringe dwellers that kind of, hung out, and had beers, watched football. Never really, I would always hear stories from other people that I worked with on shoots about going to certain record producers' houses and talking about the parties there, where the parties are set up like, how you have security rings and then you have like the inner protectee or whatever. Yeah. That's how these parties are, where you have different rings just depending on the level of where you fit in that social structure. So if you're in the inner ring, just as, if you're, a high profile protectee, you're not going to get in. Yeah. You could come to the party, but you're not getting into where all the, either drugs or sex or, like
you're at the hors d'oeuvre
sort of
table
things happening
all night.
Yeah. But there is,
table.
what I felt in LA living there for 10 years was there was a couple of weird instances, but the overall general feel for it, to me, there was a dark aura there. My wife now is born and raised in Southern California, had lived in the Hollywood area her entire life. And the house that we were in was right across the street from the Hollywood Bowl. So, I was living in the epicenter of Hollywood, right down the street from the Kimmel Theater, which is also a Masonic lodge, which is kind of strange.
Yeah.
And so it just, there's this weird sort of darkness that it's an energy that you feel that's kind of like, it's there. And you can sense it from certain people, and the other people you come in contact with, it's like, oh, okay, I get your energy. But even on shows that I've worked on, and even, executives at networks kind of give off a strange sort of energy at times. And I'm not saying that, they're a part of any sort of occultish thing that is happening, but it just, I kind of feel like their energy might be guided toward that if the opportunity ever presented itself to them. But as far as like being invited into any kind of like ritual or anything like that, I was barely invited to parties. So, I was able to steer clear of that. Like I said, the background that I had, and working in law enforcement shows and working with the military as much as I had done, you develop a reputation, and my reputation was one of, if you want to go somewhere shitty, call Tom and he'll go there. And it wasn't one of, and it wasn't one of those where, I was never called to do shows where there were a lot of politics involved, where you had, somebody trying to step over somebody to get somewhere. It was always, my forte was just going somewhere nobody else wanted to go. So I didn't fall into that clique of, trying to elbow somebody else out for a job, or somebody trying to step on me to get a position that I wanted. But I will say, this is kind of an interesting story. So the house that we lived in LA, we lived in a neighborhood called Whitley Heights, and it was built by, I think his name was Frank Whitley, back in the 1920s. And at the time, Whitley Heights was like the Beverly Hills, because there was no Beverly Hills. So you had all your silent film stars that had lived in that neighborhood. My wife had owned Betty Davis's house at one time, which is in that neighborhood. Ronald Reagan bought his first house there. Boris Karloff lived there.
Wow, lots of big names.
And so Whitley was like really enthralled with Tuscany. So the way that the neighborhood is set up, there's hills there. And so you have these, giant staircases that go up to people's property and everything. And it looks like a little like Tuscan village, right? So the neighbor who lives above us, in the house that we lived in, had been built in 1929, which is also haunted, and I can get into that a little bit later.
Please.
But the house above us, my buddy Steven and his wife lived in, and one night he's like, "Hey, Tom, come up here and bring a bottle of rum." And I'm like, "Okay." So I grabbed a bottle of rum. I ran up there. And he's like, "Check this out." And we sat on his deck. And from his deck, you can kind of see down to Hollywood Boulevard, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, "Look up." And we looked up, and there were UAPs. There were two of them flying over Hollywood, just like sitting in a hover, moving a little bit back and forth, and then it just would disappear. And they did this off and on for about an hour or so. And so I was like, thinking to myself, you know what? That's the perfect spot to be able to do, if you're surveilling people, or if you're trying to test something out, if it is some kind of, exotic propulsion device or whatever it is. Because if you're on Hollywood Boulevard, you're never looking up. Mm-hmm. You're always looking around you at the different theaters, or you're looking down to look at the Walk of Fame. So you're never looking up to see what's going on up there. So that the first time that happened, I was like, okay, maybe we're just seeing something, maybe, it had a little bit too much rum or whatever, but it's like, no, I know what I saw. So about a week later, get the same call, go up there, same pattern again. So this went on for like once a week for about, I would say, 5 weeks or so. And it's still to this day, I have no idea what it was. I do know that it wasn't a drone. I do know that because there was no, how they have the red and green running lights on them. And even the ones that were seen over
New Jersey,
that were the size of cars. Some of those had those running lights, and those aren't going to be anything that's going to be any kind of propulsion system or whatever. Sure. These didn't have it. These were just like these odd shaped, like orbs or something, that
that's how they're described.
Yeah, they weren't the size of an automobile. They were smaller. It's hard to gauge distance, but we're talking maybe a quarter mile away, something that's still, that registers as, an object, but it's not so big that it wouldn't be, out of proportion for if you were to be on Hollywood Boulevard looking up at it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary size that would, capture a lot of attention.
That's weird.
I've
heard of a lot of people having experiences like that in that area. Some of you familiar with like CE5?
No.
So you've heard of like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right? Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. Well, CE5 is just Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And CE5 is this like protocol essentially that mostly Stephen Greer talks about, but it's this protocol you can do on your own that's supposed to bring these things to you. It involves yeah, you can use laser pointers and lights and all this other stuff. I've never actually like watched somebody do it from beginning to end, and I've never gone and done it myself because like they get results. But it's go ahead. You see, you want to say something?
No, I was just going to say, I would say back in March or April, I was contacted by a friend of mine who's a producer who was like, introduced me to another guy who there's this group. I want to say they're down in Texas, and they're using what you're describing to make contact with whatever this is. And they're trying to make a deal with the government saying you can have first dibs on the first contact that we have, but then after that, we want it. And unfortunately, the producer that I was talking to couldn't work out a deal with them to be able to go down and film it on our own. They've got their own YouTube channel, so they just decided that they were going to do it themselves. It's privately funded, but it sounds like exactly the same thing you're describing.
There's a lot of people that do it and put it online. We even had a conversation with a guy who he happens to be a Mason, and a Rosicrucian, but his name is John Madrowski. He goes and does CE5 sometimes too with other Rosicrucians. And then there's another guy that I've had on, Jay Anderson, who is like really into alternative history, and he does a lot of like archaeological work. He does CE5, and they even had an experience with Tim Hogan, the Grand Master of the Templar, while they were visiting Egypt. And they had an experience like that, like what you were talking about, but in broad daylight on the Giza Plateau. And it seems to be that when you talk to these people who do it, that there has to be this mental focus and there's a word I'm looking for here, intentionality to have this happen, it's not necessarily just like going through the motions with a laser pointer and like whatever the hell else goes on. There has to be this like projection that goes out from your mind, like requesting it and opening yourself up to it and being willing to involve yourself in it. And, you know, sort of like, well, whatever happens with this, I have to be okay with, and I accept the outcome of it from this experience. And anyway, like LA seems like the perfect place to be a hotbed for a lot of that stuff. And then like you said too, like you felt like there's all this dark energy, and that you didn't think like people were necessarily in like the occult, but like they kind of like face that way. Dude, I'm not sure like what your personal beliefs are, but I truly believe that there is a spiritual element at play there in LA because of all the dark, evil shit that happens there, and that if you're involved in it in you know, in any sort of deep sense, that you can't get away from that dark spiritual energy that seems to like permeate what happens in LA. And no matter what you do, it kind of is to that end, because I think everybody there is sort of guided by it.
Yeah, I definitely believe that there is a God. I believe that Jesus is our Lord and Savior. That's my own personal belief, and I know that's an unpopular belief to have when you're in Hollywood. And I'm just amazed that I've lasted as long as I have being there. And I think a lot has to do with the fact that I didn't, you know, live there for an extended period of time, or like I said, work on the shows where people would get to know you a lot better and just do things that were on my own. But there is definitely a weird energy there. And then also, one other thing I wanted to mention to you guys about Hollywood is up in the further hills up near the reservoir. My one of the camera guys that I work with now, his baby mama lives in Jimmy Kimmel's old house, which is deep up into the hills in the Hollywood Reservoir. And he would, you know, a few years back, he'd stay there in his motorhome. He was living in a motorhome at the time and stay in the driveway and so forth. And he said every night these big construction machines, you know, like almost like boring machines, would go up into the hills and, you know, go into this one little section, like into the mountain or into the hill there, and we're carving out something. So, LA's filled with tons of tunnels. I'm sure you guys have heard the stories about what's going on at the Getty Center and the tunnels underneath that, and the rituals that happened under the Getty Center. And
no, I don't think so, honestly.
Okay. Yeah, and then all over Sunset Boulevard, you have tunnels that lead. There are tons of tunnels everywhere in Los Angeles, and that's one of the main reasons why there was never a subway system there. It's just you had so many tunnels that, you know, crisscrossed throughout the city. And so the Getty Center, the story behind the Getty Center is there's some kind of ritualistic child sacrifice that goes on deep within in the bowels of the Getty Center.
Oh, okay.
So,
I've not heard that, but that doesn't surprise me at all. It seems pretty par for the course for that area, you know.
Right. It's so my friend, you know, the camera guy's theory on this was that it's an evacuation spot for everybody who lives in there, because everybody, you know, his baby mama, her dad was, you know, a big wig in the record industry, and you know, they come from like generational, you know, the dad made generational money. And so a lot of people in that area are from, you know, do have, you know, net worths that are multi-generational. So that's kind of the thought behind that, which I can believe, just because of the amount of construction that's going on underneath Los Angeles.
Real quick, Chris is having some sort of weird audio issue. Well, technical difficulties, audience, but we're back. Chris has it fixed. We'll get back to talking about weird Hollywood shit and maybe some ghosts. You said you had there was a haunted house?
Yeah, the house that my wife and I lived in. It was built in 1929 by a silent film cinematographer. And so we move into this place, and down below they have a mother-in-law room. It's by itself. and it had been converted back in like to the 1970s into like a recording studio, and the Go-Go's had recorded their first album in there. And so if you look at the Go-Go's first album and you flip it over, and the Go-Go's were an all-girl punk group back in the 80s. I'm not sure how old you guys are. Sometimes my references are a little bit off.
Well, I'm
but
still a
anyways,
music fan, so I follow, yeah.
Right. So if you flip over that album, you see each of the band members in a bathtub, and it's the same bathtub that's in the mother-in-law quarters there. Anyways, so the house is built, against a hill, so you have to walk 2 flights of stairs to get up to the main house where we live. And the living room that we had set up, we had a couch on one wall, and then my wife has this big giant mirror, and it was a door that she had bought. It was this Balinese door, and she had a mirror put in there, so we'd have this giant mirror. And then right behind us was right behind the couch, there's a hallway and then a staircase that goes up to the bedrooms upstairs. And you're sitting on the couch watching TV, you could see the staircase in the mirror. So when we first moved in there, we're watching TV, and I keep thinking that I see something in the mirror, and every time I turn around, it's not there. And this goes on for a while, and finally I kind of make out what I'm seeing, and what I'm seeing is black and white image of a little girl who's on the staircase, peeking her head through the little, post on the stairs, looking at me, and then, going away, like really quick.
Oh, shit.
So I tell my wife, and she's like, "You're insane. There's no ghosts in here." And I'm like, she's just like playing a game. She's not like a mean ghost or anything. I mean, she's a little kid. And she's like, whatever. So we had lived there. Let's see, we moved in 2023. So this was 2015. So 2015, 2016, 2016 rolls around. I'm still seeing this girl all the time. So we're watching TV, and all of a sudden my wife was like, and I'm like, "What's up?" And she's like, "I just saw her." She had looked in the mirror and saw the little girl. So I was like, "I told you I wasn't full of shit. She actually exists." And she's like, she was just dumbfounded. She's like, "I can't believe it." So the following morning, I go up for a run. I come back, and I hear all this furniture being moved in one of our guest rooms upstairs. And I'm like, "What's going on up there?" And she's like, "Our little friend has decided to redecorate the guest room." So I go up there, and all the furniture's moved. So now that my wife has seen her and I've seen her, this, our little friend, we like to call her, is now just like doing like little childlike pranks to like get our goats. And from that moment on, she starts, moving stuff around, unplugging things, and it's always in that back bedroom. That's my son's room when he comes to visit. And then she's kind of, the other room that we have, where my daughter's room is, of course, my wife had converted into her own walk-in closet, an entire room. So, some of the clothes are on the bed, almost like she's, laying things out to see what looks the best and like putting outfits together and that sort of thing. And again, she's not doing anything malicious. She's just being very playful. Like, she's like you would do to like, I don't know if you guys ever did this, but like to your dad or your mom, you'd like play little pranks and stuff just to kind of get their goat to make sure that they were paying attention to you. That's what was going on with her. So the only time that she ever did something a little bit malicious is she was moving stuff around and we weren't paying attention to it. And so my wife had gotten this big map of the world, of not a flat earth map, but the old school style one that we all know is fake. The kind where you put the pins in where you've been around the world and everything. So we had this mounted over our fireplace in our bedroom, and she knocked that off, and in turn I had this Elvis bobblehead, and it broke the bobblehead, and that was the only thing that she had ever done that was like, "Hey fuckers, pay attention to me," that sort of like, "I'm here" kind of thing. So 2017, I'm working on Live PD. I'm in Ohio, and I get a frantic call in the middle of the night from my wife. She's like, oh my God, there's a man in the house. There's a man in the house. And I'm like, have you called the police? And she's like, no. I'm like, hang up and call 911. So she calls back, and I'm like, what happened? She goes, I was sleeping, and all of a sudden I opened my eyes, and there was a Hispanic male with face tattoos staring at me as I was sleeping.
Oh, shit.
And I was like, holy shit, that's like every woman's worst nightmare, right?
No kidding.
So she then tells me this guy starts pacing around in our bedroom and turns and looks at her and goes, God sent me to be here with you. And luckily my wife is totally insane, so she just goes berserk. She's standing up in bed screaming at him, I'm going to call the police. How the fuck do you get in here? Just like going off on him. He drops to his knees and he's like, please don't call the police. And then he gets up and she continues to yell at him. And she's like, how did you get in here? And just going off. And all of a sudden he stops. He's looking at her. He stops. He looks into the hallway and she's like, his face just dropped. And all of a sudden he just ran from our bedroom out through the hallway, and then through our hallway was a door to the backyard, and the backyard goes up the hill. He ran, opened the door, jetted out through the back, and ran up into the woods there. And she's like, I have no idea why he bolted out of there. She's like, I was scanning the room trying to figure out what he was going to pick up and beat me to death with. And while she was thinking that is when he looked out and saw something that spooked him and ran out of there. So to this day, I think it was that girl.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It took on the form of something else.
Yeah. That just like scared the shit out of this guy that made him bolt out of there. Because if you've got a dude inside a house with a female by herself, it's not going to end well, no matter how. Yeah. It just that the story never has a happy ending until this. This is the only one that I've ever heard of where, for some reason, something happened to that guy to spook him enough to get him out of there.
Well, number one, if you got face tattoos, taking the Church of the Latter-day Saints cover or the missionary cover of like I Was Sent Here by God, it's probably not your best cover to go with. Maybe find something else because it doesn't, it's not very believable.
Or you're crazy.
Right.
Yeah. But Tom, I'm really interested to get your take on this, and I always love having this debate with people because I myself am a Christian man, and I know that like theologically speaking, Bible says if we are absent from the body, we are present with Christ. And so there's this, the most Christians will believe and tell you that there are no such things as ghosts. There are angels and demons and spiritual beings, but, human spirits aren't here on earth. If you're absent from your body, then you go right either to heaven or hell, right? Or purgatory if you're a Catholic brethren, and you're stuck there because you didn't, pay good enough at the altar or whatever, however that works. You're the Catholic, you can tell me. But what do you think about human spirits? Because I have a few experiences that I've had myself, and a lot of things that we've talked about on this podcast and a lot of guests that we've had on that now have me thinking that there's more to paranormal phenomenon, especially when it has to do with apparitions, poltergeists, ghosts, just to kind of encompass all of that I'm like, I don't know how hard line I am on that theology anymore.
Yeah, I look at it like this. I feel a lot the way you do about angels. And I also, my Catholic upbringing, when you die, you go, and see St. Michael. And if you're ready to go into heaven, you're allowed in heaven. If not, you sit in purgatory until, it's time for you to go in there.
Okay.
But what I have gone through in my life is in the idea that I've come up with for myself to try and explain these sort of unexplainable things that I've encountered is I think if a soul is taken away in an unusual act, whether it be, being shot randomly, or, if they kill themselves, or if they die in a way that they weren't supposed to. And I know that God has a plan for everything, but I think, it's just really hard to say that God can mess up or whatever, but I think that there are certain timelines that you're on, and being omniscient, he would know that every timeline that you're on. But here's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that I think those souls kind of get stuck between realms. And it's something, could it be purgatory? I guess it could be. And that's why we see them, because they're waiting for their time to get into heaven. Or could it be something else that they just haven't figured out where they need to be, how they need to be able to make that last progression? Were they holding on to something that isn't quite letting them break away from the earthly realm that they were in to the next spiritual level that they're supposed to go to? So I kind of think for myself, I think it's somewhere in there. Because I don't know if you've had these experiences being around people who've died unnaturally, whether it's been like a murder or a gunfight. Whenever I come up to that body and it's still warm and there's steam coming off it, I have always felt the first time it happened to me was in Kansas City, Kansas, when I was working on cops, and it was an unusual call that we got. The dispatcher called, said to our officer, "Hey, can you give us a call? This is a really weird 911 call that came in." She said that a priest had called her because somebody had called this priest and said, "You need to send a car to this address. The front door is going to be open. Tell the police officer to do the right thing and go inside." So we walked inside, and as soon as we walked in there, I felt like somebody had put like a warm blanket over my shoulders that extended all the way to the floor. And as I was walking, I could feel like if you were to have a blanket on you hitting like the back of my like Achilles as I was walking. So we made our way up the stairs, and as soon as we started, ascending the stairs, I could see blood on the white walls that were in the hallway there. And then when we got to the first landing and rounded the corner, I'm filming the police officer. He's got his gun out, and he gets on his radio and he says, "Send ident and detectives. We've got a homicide." So I come around the corner, and there's a guy laying there who had literally had his brains beaten out with a baseball bat, and just, skull fracture, just a total mess, as you can imagine with someone getting their head bashed in. And it wasn't like one or two shots. This was like somebody was really angry. This was a hateful kind of death.
I don't have to imagine, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so we, after he put out the radio call just to make sure that he was dead, even though his brains were out, came back down the stairs, came outside, put up the crime scene tape, waited for the detectives to get there. We get in the car, me and my sound guy and the officer, and I was like, "Did anyone feel any kind of weirdness when we crossed the threshold of the house?" And the cop goes, "Yeah, I felt like somebody put a blanket on me." And I was like, "Are you shitting me?" I felt the same thing. And I turned back to my sound guy, and he's like, and we're all like, "Whoa, that is really weird." So that was the first time that I felt like somebody dying in an unnatural way. I felt like something about them, something about their energy. And maybe it is just energy. Maybe, when that person does leave this realm in an unnatural way, maybe part of their energy sticks behind because, it somehow it gets, separated from the soul. I'm still not sure what that is. All I know is what I know with the experiences that I've had, and I can't really explain them.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. I'll do the same thing because fair is fair. I'm not going to ask you to lay yourself out there without, following you into the void. But I think that most of those, like if you were to kind of break hauntings kind of out, so we got ghosts and then we trickle out, we kind of have like the poltergeists and the malevolence on one side. I think a lot of those can be explained through like demons and evil spiritual beings, like the large bulk of them. And then kind of over on the other side, if you just have Brandon helped me with the terminology. I'm trying to remember, where it's like spirits that you can't necessarily communicate with, like they're not intelligent
like
spirits.
A bleed through, maybe like Gettysburg would be an example.
Yeah, it was going to be the example that I was going
bleed
to.
Throughs, yeah, bleed over.
Where you just kind of have things that play back on a loop.
Energy.
Yeah, and I think that maybe extra dimensionality. I think Brandon and I have had conversations about places like that where it's like the quartz and the rock. How we know that when people die, there's kind of like an explosion of electromagnetic energy that happens as the body gives up everything, and it's I think that there's something to the theory that energy can get trapped in the quartz and trapped in the rock, and then it plays back on a loop, especially with big events where lots of people die all at once, like Gettysburg is a perfect example. But there's that weird one, that sliver in the middle, where people will talk about experiences like you said with the little girl that maybe helped you, but it definitely seemed like an intelligent spirit, but possibly looked out for you at one point. Or you'll hear stories from people that talk about seeing a deceased loved one that will cause them to turn the car at one point, and they don't understand why, because they saw their loved one, and then I avoided a car crash. And it's like, those are the ones, that little sliver in the middle, that I have the hardest time of going through my Bible and being like, all right, let's see what the Bible has to say about this. And we also did an episode where I broke it down and showed that the Bible does make room for human spirits coming back from the dead, because there's a point in the Old Testament where King Saul seeks out the witch of Endor, and he says, bring me back Samuel so that I can speak with him. And when Samuel comes back, the witch freaks out, and then she looks and realizes that it's Saul, and she's like, what have you had me do? And then Saul has a conversation with the spirit of Samuel, who asks, why have you brought me here? So the Bible does make room for it, but it's like, what would allow or cause that phenomenon to happen? I still don't know.
Right. What do you think about? I'm going to get off the track a little bit here, but taking that from the Bible, what do you think about? And we've seen this recently about AI generating somebody that's deceased and bringing them back.
Are you talking about like that kid at the Parkland school, and
the Parkland shooter, and then also the victim of a murder, of a homicide, addressed the court?
I think that, first off, I think that is really stupid. I'll just put that up front. I think if you're a grieving person and like you do this on your own to like cope with the loss of a loved one, like I'm not going to call you stupid. Like if that's what you do is like part of your grieving process, like okay. But the fact that guy, the CNN anchor, was interviewing this kid, his fucking avatar, or whatever you want to call it, and the parents were okay with it, and they had encouraged and set up this conversation on CNN, like, I think you are a gross person at this point. Like you're not speaking to your kid. Pretending like you are is insane. And it's just like, that is, and this is going to sound fucked up, but levels of cope that you need to go see a psychologist over. And you have to know you're not speaking to your son. You're speaking to whatever LLM is deriving information from, and it's pretending to be something. And to sit there and speak to it and ask its opinion on gun control and what do you see for the future, and and it just gives this fucking canned answer. It's just like, how are we trying to use this as like a metric for morals and ethics? Like, though the deceased kid from the high school's AI avatar said you need to give up your guns. It's like, no, the LLM that's been created over a period of time with weights and counterweights and ethics and logic and reward systems and all these other things, like is now giving you an answer it found on the internet. Like, it's gross, it's stupid, it's not reality, and it's flirting, I think, with a line of like indecent. Like it's indecent, I think, and disrespectful too.
Yeah, I think it's wicked and manipulative. Like on its face. Yeah.
But I also feel like too that the toothpaste is out of the tube at this point. So you're going to have generations coming up who are going to look at AI as being the ultimate definitive source on something, almost creating a digital god for themselves.
Albania, sorry to cut you off, but Albania, the prime minister over there, just appointed an AI cabinet member.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's crazy too, because it's like I talk about this all the time. Sam Altman has been in 100 conversations, but one of the things he talked about is making room in the social contract for artificial intelligence. And social contract implies a set of emotions and personality traits that belong to humans and are innately human, that an AI cannot have, because it cannot have the human experience. It can't have a soul, can't have all these things that a human being has. So to talk about involving it in a social contract, when first off, it was created by us, even though there's people that like argue, well, I've asked like AI, like, did you already exist, or like, did we discover you, or were you invented? And I've seen AI, like mostly ChatGPT, give the answer of like, well, I was always here just waiting for you to discover me. And it's like, well, that's not fucking true. Like, you're not sitting in the ether. Like, you were just an idea that somebody that came to fruition. You know, you existed in the realms of a Philip K. Dick novel at one point, you know, and like in that way you existed. But it's going to, I think you're right, it's going to become a substitute for a lot of things. And what's to say that a teacher doesn't decide to use the AI version of Winston Churchill to talk about, you know, his opinion on the growing fascism in the United States. And
yeah,
Winston Churchill gives this, well, back in my day, I fought fascists, you know, and it's like some fucking 14-year-old retard who's in a Discord server run by an O9A fucking mod is like, yeah, man, go do a school shooting because Columbine is cool. I'm going to mail you a KMFDM t-shirt. You know, it's just like, that's where you're headed with crap like that, in my opinion. Anyway,
not just that. I agree with you, Tom. The tube. Oh my gosh, the toothpaste is out of the tube, and you can't put it back at this point. And my personal theory is that, and I don't quite know how yet. I don't know what dominoes have yet to fall, but I think that AI is going to be wrapped up in the coming of the Antichrist somehow. Whoever that all-knowing being that can almost seem omniscient with all the knowledge of the, you know, human history at the palm of its hand, but also is plugged into the social media predictive algorithming of being able to, you know, proact social movements and so forth. Like, you can't tell me that doesn't have something to do with whoever that being is going to be.
yeah,
Right. I agree. I do think that, you know, if the end of the world is going to come with AI, because once AI becomes sentient, the one thing that human beings have that AI will never have and is incapable of having is a soul. And I think that will be the thing that will drive AI to the brink of, if I can't have a soul, nobody will.
I mean, that's a fair premise, right?
It might be a fair premise for, you know, a movie or something.
Well, sure, but that's what I almost said. That's like, you know, it is like, it's the Matrix, you know, like you can't exist in a perfect world, but, you know, human beings are the thing fucking up equilibrium, which is the whole Agent Smith monologue he gives with Neo. You know, he's got him tied up, but like, I think that artificial, first off, I think that artificial intelligence, whatever we see and interact with, and it's mostly LLMs, whatever is behind the curtain has got to be better. And, you know, we've talked a lot about some odd conspiracy things, but there's that kid that worked for OpenAI, and that, like, Tucker Carlson just confronted Sam Altman on his show about it and basically implied that he had him murdered.
Right.
And the kid was, you know, whistleblowing on unethical decisions. There was that whole instance where Sam Altman's board voted to remove him, and I don't know how long he was not on it. Was it like 12 hours? Maybe it wasn't even that long. And then all of a sudden he was back, he was CEO, and everybody was fucking gone. And they cited all of these ethical concerns and that Sam wasn't being honest about what was going on. And of course, the thing that everybody jumped to immediately is, well, this isn't just AI we're talking about. Now we're talking about AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is the whole sentience thing. And, you know, now you see him like cozied up with the Trump administration, and you see Peter Thiel in there with the Trump administration, and
Larry Ellison.
they're Larry Ellison is another one. In the freaking, he's the Oracle guy, isn't he? Larry Ellison. Yeah. And they just, how much money did fucking Nvidia just pump into, or say they're going to pump into OpenAI, just like 2 days ago? It's an ungodly amount of number. And I made a post about this on X. I said, like, people are worried about the intellectual competition that we're going to have with artificial intelligence, but we are literally already competing with it on an energy consumption competition, because when you look at how much money data centers and how much energy data centers require, like, that'll be the reason why you lose your rights and privileges before, in my opinion, before AI ever starts fucking developing the TI 800 or whatever the fuck Arnold is and sends it out to hunt your ass. Like, that's what you're going to be competing for. You're going to be competing for energy, and your energy rates or your energy cost is going to go up. And then now you're going to talk about, like, well, all of these data centers, they have to have, you know, water for specific things, and now you're competing with water and consumption rates and your usage rates. And California already has rolling blackouts, and they suggest that you turn down your thermostats. And then some states have, like Colorado, I know because my uncle bitches about it all the time, that they can control his thermostat in his house, and they'll fucking adjust it and lock the shit. And it's just like this thing he's like, well, I opted into it. I'm like, why would you opt into anything like that? Like, you're just, I save money on my bill every month. And it's like, okay, like, that you're building the cage you live in by doing that. Yeah, velvet handcuffs. Yeah. It's just, that's the real competition right now, you know?
You know, people are building their digital gulags and they don't know it. I mean, the last wall in that gulag is going to be CBDC. They're already they've already implemented. Well, they're starting to implement the 15-minute city. That's the next goal, is to make sure that everything that you need is within 15 minutes of where you live, because to me, the ultimate goal, ultimately, demoralization is at the bottom of this. If you can demoralize a human being from not wanting to explore and not wanting to go out on adventure, and just have their adventures and their exploring be virtual, that's the ultimate goal. So you don't need to go anywhere. So the 15-minute city makes sense if that's where your world is. But the Sam Altman and I almost said murder, but the unaliving of that dude.
Sure. Yeah.
That whole crime scene doesn't make sense, because the PD comes in there and they're like, oh yeah, it looks like a suicide. Yeah, but it looks like it started in this room when he was fighting with somebody, unless he was fighting himself, which would be really weird. And then he ends up in this room where we find his body. Excuse me. I have never seen a suicide where somebody started fighting themselves and then finished themselves in another room.
Well, and oh, by the way, he had left his apartment to go get food and came back with that food, and that food was there on his desk unconsumed.
Yeah.
Like, if you know you're about to kill yourself, like, I guess maybe you want to fucking have a send-off with Chipotle, but you would eat it, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You wouldn't leave it on the desk.
No, it being your last meal.
Yeah. Right.
Well,
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Like,
to your point too, Tom, it's not just like physically trying to capture people by just giving them I look at it as a jail cell of convenience. It doesn't matter if your jail cell is 3 blocks by 3 city blocks. It's still a jail cell that you are choosing to live inside because my convenience says, well, why would I venture outside of it? Everything's right here. Whitney Webb is doing a really good job of reporting on this on X. And she put out a video recently where she's talking about the ideological jail cell too, that AI AI is representing, to where if all of the information that you need is so readily available to you, but it's through the AI to get to it, not only is all the information you're consuming being curated by somebody on the other side, or at least the, you know, whoever designs the LLM and how it's thinking, but also you are losing the ability as a human being to reason and do things like math in your own head and, you know, calculate time and distance and critically think, because you're giving up the ability to do these things just through atrophy alone, because you don't practice these skills anymore. You just pick up your phone and you go, hey, you know, whoever your subscriber gives you, like, and talk to that, and you're like, oh, okay, see, I found the answer really quick. No, you didn't find the answer. You didn't do any research.
I want to make 2 points about that, right? That concept is as old as Socrates, because Socrates talked about and was against writing things down. He preferred the oral tradition and memory, and he made this whole argument about how you shouldn't write things down because then you become lazy in what you're talking about. You no longer have to remember it. You can cast it to the side, and you know, it becomes this exercise you do in vacating your mind of the things that you should have stored. And so like this idea has been around for a long time that you need to use the muscle here between your fucking ears inside your skull. But then the other thing too, with like artificial intelligence and you, like you said, the gleaning of information, I think it, when you look at it that way, it becomes the next iteration of what we talk about a lot here when it comes to curated information. Not just that you're being fed info because of an algorithm and the things that you show the algorithm you have an interest in, but we talk too about how like the digitalization of media. Back in the day when everybody was running on getting news from newspapers and Walter Cronkite, you know, the Kansas City Star was writing about things and had journalists that ran around and found information in Kansas City and the surrounding area. And you got local news from journalists going out and doing it. And every once in a while, like if something was really big, like you would get that news story because it's it nationally has significance. And now you go look at a publication like the Kansas City Star, and most of it is just Associated Press news. It's not actual journalism. And then when you publish news on the internet, how many times have you known you've seen an article and you try to go find it and it's fucking gone? Or you find the article and the title is the same, but the info is fucking different, and it'll have like an edited by and date and time stamped. Or sometimes, like I think this happens, they edit it and they don't put in there like what the accurate change is. Well, when you publish a newspaper, you have to then publish another one with a correction. But your mistake or the false information you published exists now in hard copy. You can't do that with the computer. Well, then AI becomes the next step of that, because now you're putting total trust into somebody who's developing an LLM and the way it deciphers information and gives it to you. And then when you look at morals and ethics and the weights is what they're called, that an AI uses for reasoning, and the reward system or whatever it's used to give it its own sense of morality, like it's completely and totally designed by somebody. You have no idea who that person is. And if now you most people do use something like ChatGPT or Claude or Grok as a Google, as it used to be, to give it information. Well, why I think that like a search engine at some point I think is going to become totally obsolete. Look at even Google's Gemini is a totally inferior artificial intelligence to OpenAI's or Anthropic's artificial intelligence. Totally inferior. Like it's going to go away. I think that this concept of the search engine is going to turn into AI being your personal assistant that you Google shit on, because Google has now become a word, right? It's that's going to be what it is, and it's an even more curated form of information that now somebody has more hands in and can twist the screw on it, so to speak, and ratchet. And even today, I was trying to post something about Antifa and on my Instagram page, and it kept giving me an error. And I was posting two photos. I was posting a photo from the 1930s of like the actual like German anti-fascist action group, and then a meme I made of Boromir, the like, not you can one Antifa is not simply anti-fascist, because I'm like trying to give the context of like the actual communist roots of Antifa, right? And it let me post it with just the Boromir meme, but then when I went to put the info I wanted in to describe like what I was talking about, it would not let me post any of the comments I was putting into it. And so I just deleted the whole post and I'm going to try again later. But like, that's just Meta censoring me, because I posted just a random photo to see if maybe there was an error or something was going on with Instagram, and it posted the photo and I just deleted it immediately as a test run. But they're fucking with me, and were today, because I was talking about Antifa, or trying to talk about Antifa. Well, that could get way worse with something that's reasoning on its own, with a little pat on the ass every time from the artificial intelligence engineer behind the scenes, tightening and untightening the fucking, marionette strings.
But one of the unintended consequences with AI that we've seen, and just computers in general, is the elimination of cursive from school curriculums. Yeah. Kids no longer learn cursive. So now, if you don't know how to write it, you're not going to know how to read it. So all of our founding documents are in cursive. So if those get translated into AI, it's up to the discretion of who's ever creating that translation for it, so they can make it say whatever they want it to say, because you're going to have generations of people who won't be able to read that. They'll look at cursive like they're trying to, decipher Sumerian text or something, because they just have no frame of reference for it. So the manipulation is there for future generations not to know what exactly the first line of the Constitution is, or what the Bill of Rights are, because the original text is something that they can't make out.
Well,
buy books, guys. Buy books, especially the Bible. Buy the Bible. Have many copies of it.
I have a ton of real books, but the day something happens and it blows up the fucking Constitution and the original Declaration of Independence, and those things don't exist, or maybe it happens in England and the original, because like the Magna Carta, there's a couple Magna Cartas, like they get blown up and destroyed or something like that. Like then I'll be like, oh man, well there it is, dude, what you're talking about, because now it only exists in digital form. And then you're gonna have all these books that have like the original language in the Magna Carta, and you're gonna have all these books that have the original language, the Declaration of Independence. But look at people online now who come with like, oh, I have this book from the 19th century that talks about this historical event. And as time has gone on, like the reality or the truth or whatever you want to call it in this book has now morphed into whatever all of these other Houghton, Mifflin, McLaughlin, or wherever they are, textbooks that have, infiltrated the schools, they say. But this is what was actually being talked about in 1850 about this. Books will only last a generation or two at that point, because, well, you're going to keep making new books. And if you're hell bent on removing people from the things that make them who they are, these unifying characteristics like a founding document, then you're going to find a way to subserve that and destroy it by introducing a false one, and then removing people from that identity by gaslighting them into thinking there's something they're not. It's just it's not uncommon, and has happened in the past. What were you gonna say, Chris?
Did you guys see this story? I think it happened back in mid 2022, if I remember correctly. But I believe it was Roald Dahl's books. So Big Friendly Giant, James and the Giant Peach, right? This guy. But it became a story back then. I remember, I think Matt Walsh was talking about it. But whoever the publisher was going into Roald Dahl's texts and altering problematic sections of it in order to make it friendlier for modern audiences. Shout out to the critical drinker, right? And people were raising a stink about it back then, because they were like, this is the author's work. You can't posthumously edit him and then continue to print the book but say it was written by Roald Dahl, because now it's not. And to your point, Brandon, it's not like you're publishing a edited by 2022 by this staff, and then you have to physically hold the pages together to go through, if you are lucky enough to have a copy printed before that, to figure out what in the world they changed. You know what I mean? And that's why I said buy a Bible. Buy a Bible, have a physical copy of it, because so many people run around with the Bible on their iPad or in the Bible app on their iPhone or whatever it is. And it's like, do you know the Bible well enough to pull up a verse and I'll read it and go, oh, that wasn't the original. That's not what it said before.
This is literally why I have not gotten rid of any of my DVDs.
Same.
Yeah, good man. I just started. I had a bunch of them to begin with, but one of my favorite things to do is to go to Goodwill and find the most obscure and random DVDs I can find for like $2.
Yeah,
I love it, dude.
that's a great idea. No, I won't, because how many, like, that's happened with Gone with the Wind, where people purchased Gone with the Wind, and then when it wasn't politically correct enough, they took it down off of Amazon and all these other places. It's like, well, wait, I paid $40 for this, and now it's gone. Well, it's like, well, actually, if you read the fine print, you're only leasing a copy of this from us. You don't actually own it. Well, it's like, fuck you. Right, like that's why I have all of my DVDs. I've got fucking 200 damn DVDs and CD sleeves out there in my entertainment center, because I'm not gonna get rid of all that shit, because you don't own anything that you can't hold in your hand.
Well, eventually they're just going to stop making DVD players, and then the next step after that is to outlaw DVD players so that you can't look at what's on that medium.
Oh my gosh!
We know you have DVDs in your house.
Equilibrium,
sounds like
dude.
the British police
Equilibrium.
right now, man. Right?
Well, Rodal was quite the bounder when he came to the United States. You know about Rodal in, being a spy and,
I do.
shooting ropes onto, the wives of dudes who
was.
they wanted.
Yeah. Crazy.
Things
You
I'm
think
going to
about
do for my country.
Yeah. Well, also, too, do you guys know who Julia Child is? This woman.
the chef.
Bon
Yeah.
appetit.
All right, I want you, after we get done with this, I want you to Google Julia Child younger, because she worked for the OSS during World War II, right? Mm-hmm. Julia Child is a dude. And the reason why I say that is if you look at the photos of her as a young woman, it's going to be, they're not pleasant. Plus, this is part of the idea that I have behind it, is the fact that there were so many Nazi officers that were into the whole trans thing. And that was part of their deal. And it was like, all right, if Julia's got a dong, let's send her in there, because that's what, these German dudes like.
She's cooking sausage today.
Spotted dick.
There's a picture of her in a bathtub with
Can we just-
somebody.
Can we just agree on something?
With her husband. That
Yeah,
is
it's
a
a
dude.
man's job, bro.
If you're a dude and you're
Looks like
dating
John Wayne.
a trans lady, or however that goes, you're just being gay with extra steps, bud. Can we just
That's it,
agree
dude.
on that?
It's just gay. It is. Listen,
just gay.
man. If you're gonna be gay, then be gay. Don't ask me to participate in your delusion.
Right.
Yeah. Go be gay. I don't care. Doesn't affect
really
my
don't.
life. Yeah. I just don't want to hear about it all the time, and you tell me that I'm a piece of shit because, I don't go to pride events or something.
You're a transphobe because you won't date a trans.
Oh yeah, that's right.
That was one that I heard.
I know, dude. These are the people that support like the Me Too movement. It's like, well, like you just said, well, if you're not dating a trans woman, then you're a transphobe. It's like, well, you'll be the first to acknowledge that preference is a real thing and you shouldn't force anybody into sexual contact, but here you are telling me I just need to be okay with the bussy instead of the pussy. Like that makes no sense, like, and then well, if genitals don't affirm sex, then why do you need to cut your dick off to feel like a chick?
Exactly.
That makes no sense.
But
Well,
that's what.
Sorry, go ahead.
One of the things that drives me crazy about the way society has either progressed or regressed in some cases is back when I first started in reality television, and I developed a dark sense of humor just with the subject matter that I was dealing with and the people that I was working with, and that was just part of the gig, right? But and so those again were sort of like fringe things. Dark humor was a fringe thing. Like weird fetishes that you would read about in these old things called porno mags. In like Hustler or whatever it
Why are the
was.
pages sticky?
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, dude, I got a funny story about that in Afghanistan.
Yeah, of
So-
course.
It's a good place. Yeah.
But it to me, all of the things that I found comical, and people like who were in the same sort of mindset felt comical, all seem to be mainstream now. So there's, you know, being like normal is like being punk rock now. Whereas in the past, knowing about soundings or knowing about, you know, cucking and that kind of shit that, you know, you would just like, you know, talk shit with your buddies with is all like mainstream. It's like, where did we go so wrong?
Yeah.
But what I was going to tell you about the porno magazines is back in '02. So I show up at Camp Harriman, then we go to De Raoud. De Raoud, Firebase Tice, doesn't have a proper bathroom. So, of course, one of the first things that we do is we build this thing that me and one of the team members, Luke, dubbed the Taj Mahal, right? And so
Perfect.
we build this thing. It's got,
Isn't that just the Taj Mahal anyway?
And so, I mean, this thing is like the Cadillac of plywood dumpers, you know, with that tin barrel or down below with the mow gas and everything.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, the first couple of, well, I'll backtrack a little bit. The medic, Jim, had written John Stagliano, who's the publisher of Buttman magazine, that they were going to Afghanistan to go hunt Bin Laden. So John Stagliano sends him like this giant crate of
That's a good
porno
delta.
magazines.
Hell yeah, man.
So they're traveling. I mean, this shit must have come in, you know, like on a pallet or something. It's like he had this big crate of porno, right? And so, like the first day, you know, the Taj Mahal up and running. You go in there, you go to the bathroom. There's like, you know, hand sanitizer, toilet paper. The next day, you go in there. There's like one magazine. Go in there the next day. There's another magazine. Go in there. There's lotion in there. The next thing you go in, there's more magazines. The following day, there's more different kinds of lotion with lanolin, without lanolin, with aloe, without aloe.
There's a used and unused sock basket. Who's washing these? I don't know. Not me. I like the crunch.
That was my introduction into the U.S. military.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could get really gross here.
I knew exactly where you're going when you're like, "Oh, that reminds me of Afghanistan." I was like, "Oh, here we go, dude."
Yeah.
Oh, and that was at the time too, where you know you had like a Maxim magazine. They're like, "Hey, man, hide that shit from the Afghans because they'll go crazy they'll shoot each other for it to get a look at a Maxim magazine."
Oh yeah,
it's just like bikinis, you know,
yeah,
and like a thong, you know. Well, I mean, dude, I guess when you're used to goat ass, you know, that's one of my favorite memes. Is it says something like, "You haven't lived unless you've jerked off in a 140-degree porta potty." That's in full kit. It's like, well, you know, that was we've all done things, you know.
One of my favorites, my buddy sent me the other day. It was the scene from Jurassic Park. You know, the goat comes up, and then it was like the girl when she like leans out and she looks at it, but it was like, you know, the youngest private in the platoon, his first day in Afghanistan. What's going to happen to the goat? Like, oh, yeah. Just wait.
The Turk walks up.
Have you guys heard the one about the giant of Kandahar?
Oh yeah.
Yes?
You're talking about? Yes, I have. Yeah.
I want that story to be true so badly, but, you know, supposedly it takes place in '02. That's when I was there. That's when I was at Kandahar, and there was nothing there. The weird thing was when I went back to Kandahar in 2012 to do a film for Animal Planet, dude, there was an ice skating rink or a hockey rink there. There was a TGI Fridays. Dude, the first time I was there was like one hut, you know? It was just like there was nothing there. But I keep going back to that story, and I'm trying to figure out where that originated from, because I do believe that, you know, I believe the Nephilim, and, you know, I do think that here's one of the weirdest, not weirdest, but another theory that I have. I do believe that the professional athletes that we have nowadays are descendants of the Nephilim. And I think that whoever the Watchers, or, you know, the modern day Watchers, or whoever, kind of tried to corral the Nephilim, started doing that with professional sports and organizing professional sports to make sure the Nephilim could concentrate on something else other than running wild and like cannibalizing and that sort of thing. So if you have these descendants, you have to be able to do something. I think that's one of the lessons that was learned through previous generations of them coming up and to try and curtail another cataclysm because they're up to what they normally do, but this way you could get them focused and pacify them. A lot of what we see with everything when it comes to being governed or when it comes to any sort of control is always trying to pacify whatever you think is something that's a danger to you.
Yeah.
Well, two things. One, can we go back and appreciate the segue between our bestiality jokes and then Tom saying, "Oh, that reminds me of when I went back to Kandahar filming for Animal
Giant
Planet."
of Kandahar. Right. Yeah.
That's one. Two, my personal theory about the Nephilim is that I think that there are people that are running around the world that are truly soulless individuals, human beings, but they're human beings without souls. Like, especially if you can see people and you wonder, if they're sociopathic or, how are certain people able to gain positions of so much power and then seem to have no ability to have human empathy about them whatsoever and do these egregious things to their fellow man or legislate or govern in certain way that is evil towards their fellow man. But my basis for that theory is that you go back to in Genesis when it talks about it, if you have the sons of God, which is a spirit, having relations with the daughters of men, human beings, and they're not procreating the way that God designed them to do, right? So the Nephilim, especially if they're fallen angels, if you think about it that way, which I don't think the angels, God's good angels were doing this. So I think we can agree that they were demons most likely. If they don't have the spark of life in them that God breathed into human beings and that we procreate and then our offspring has a soul like God designed. But if these descendants are coming from a race of people where ultimately one of their parents was a demon and one was a human being, I don't think that those children would have souls because they were procreated the right way. And then as those children propagate and procreate, I don't think that their offspring would suddenly be able to have souls because of their lineage. And so I think we truly do have evil, soulless human beings like walking around the earth. I think it exists. That's my theory. But Brandon, you were going to jump off on something and I jumped in. I apologize.
No, I was just going to say that Tom's explanation about that sort of makes sense.
It does, though.
If you are to believe the elite bloodline theory and the way that they maintain control and it's passed down hereditarily, then, well, that makes sense too, to pass down this we need to funnel all of this extra ability into something, and sports, whatever it was. The Olympics is a very old thing, track, throwing, it's morphed into all these other different sports, pancration, wrestling, all these other things. It's not unreasonable, that assumption that could be it, because where did they all go? Does the Bible doesn't offer up an explanation to say that they're all dead, right? Not at all. Why wouldn't all of these, if we're all human beings and we are, and we pass things down genetically, then certainly that all still exists. And maybe that's why some people, are like rhesus negative. I always thought about that too. What's the, I want to say it's the Basque people have the highest concentration of people with a specific type of blood that's incredibly rare, and their language doesn't tie to any other languages, none of the Romance languages or anything like that. And yeah, there's a bunch of weird things like that, but I don't know. It doesn't seem that far-fetched that could exist that way.
Yeah, that's what I like conspiracies and I like history. I like when they blend together, because you have the narrative from, these so-called, experts in these different fields, and
yes,
they're not experts. I hate when somebody brings on an expert
Right.
Because especially when they say this, the science is settled, we've convened these panels and, this is what we've come up with. No, it's always changing. And if you believe that something is settled, then you're not doing your specific field of scholarship any good by saying, this is it. There are no more questions to anything. This is the timeline of the Earth. The Younger Dryas theory is total bullshit, and you can't look at anything else. This is it. And, you're a kook if you think any differently. That's the part of, this sort of class this expert class that we have that I just find so distasteful, that always seem to be pushing, whatever narrative that everybody has signed off on. And again, being a fringe dweller and never being at the cool table with anybody or the inner circles of anything else, to me, asking questions is always the thing that makes sense. I feel like if you don't ask any questions and if you don't have any sort of curiosity on whatever's being told to you, then it just, you may as well just, line up for your 8th booster or whatever and just wait for the CBDC and, give your sperm of what's left to it to the bank so they can fertilize it into a test tube and create, another person, another peasant, because you're in the peasant class, because, if you're a fringe dweller, you're supposed to be a peasant, because the elites have their own sort of, their own sort of class of people that they need to breed with. But when you were talking about it, one thing that I wanted to bring up, when you were talking about pop culture, and you had alluded to the CIA trafficking cocaine into the United States, during the whole Iran Contra, and then the rise of rap music. That whole timeline totally adds up to being able to funnel in money, and then you throw in Jeffrey Epstein, working with Adnan Khashoggi and their arms deals that are going on with Iran that are being filtered to Central America. But then you also have the prison, the private prison system starts up. And then that's when you have the 94 legislation about the difference between crack cocaine and powder cocaine. And then that's when, when rap music first started, it was, more about just sort of life in general. And, with Grandmaster Flash and, some of the old Run DMC. And then you get into NWA kind of kicking everything off, and I'd once watched an interview with Ice Cube, and Ice Cube, you talk about somebody who's not from the hood. Both of his parents were teachers. He went to a private school. He was just, a regular kid. And I was watching an interview with him, and he was talking about the Straight Outta Compton album. And he was like, we only wrote one original song on that album. And the interviewer was like, where did the rest come from? And he's like, well, let's just say they came from other people. And it's like, okay, other people. So that leads me to believe the same people who are bringing in the product also probably had a hand, not the exact same people, but an offshoot of those people had a hand in that. And the same camera guy that I was telling you about that I work with, whose ex-wife had bought Kimmel's house. We were on break maybe like 2017, 2018. He's back in LA and he goes into this vegan restaurant, and who does he see in there? This may have been 2018. I'm not sure when he got out, but it's right after he got out was Freeway Ricky Ross. And so he starts chatting with Ricky Ross, and it gets down, and Ricky was really nice to him, and they were talking about food and music, and they were talking about how fucked up it was that Rick Ross, the rapper, took his name, and he tried to sue Rick Ross to get his name back and lost.
Oh shit.
So, yeah. And so toward the end of the conversation, my buddy's like, I gotta know, did Gary Webb kill himself? And he's like, what do you think? And he's like, I kind of think he did. And he's like, I think you're probably on the right track with that train of thought. Because, Gary Webb was the one, who broke the whole thing wide open with the CIA, and then all of a sudden shoots himself twice to kill himself.
Right. Well, the gun went off by itself.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a SIG.
Was it a SIG?
Known to happen. But again, those are patterns that to me line
cases.
up. If you want to continue on, if the government wants to continue on with what LBJ had set up to make one segment of the population to destroy their families and have this sort of prison class where you glorify drug dealing, you glorify going into jail, you glorify wearing your pants down, which to me still drives me insane. I will tell you this though, back in '97 when it first started getting really popular, foot chases were a breeze because they'd take 2 steps and they would fall, they'd trip over their shit.
You didn't think that one through, did ya?
No. It just, you started seeing prison culture start to drip into those communities, and it's like, okay, we're on a bad track here, man. This, to me, it was totally done on purpose by the government to make sure that they had a constant stream of people going into prisons. And what I feel like is happening now with society is the same pattern happening in other communities. With the Hispanic community, with the white community, that you're getting to see this sort of glorification of violence. And that, to me, that's what we're seeing with, coming back to, these white male shooters that we've been seeing, for the last decade or so. There's a lot of similarities between, the guys who are slinging dope back in the late 80s, early 90s and going to prison, and then these who, are just the personality traits are same, but I think the methods of getting them to act in a certain way is different. And I think that goes back to, a mix of the pharmaceuticals and then, people being planted inside of some of these chat rooms to be able to, go on with their kind of, manipulation of their mind.
Yeah, I agree. Well, dude, Tom, it's getting late where I'm at, and I know it's probably late where you are too. This was a super fun conversation. I would love to have you back on. You could be like our alternative news anchor. You can come on here and be like, man, that would be fucking awesome. Tom is back with his take on whatever bullshit is going on around the world, and that would be a lot of fun. But dude, I appreciate the hell out of you coming on and talking to us. It was a fun time. I appreciate all the crazy stories and the fun conversations, texting you and all that stuff. So, do you have a social media presence or anything like that? I know you're on the show with Drew, but do you have anything else like that?
Yeah, I mean, my social media presence is pretty small. I'm on X. It's at Run the World Tom on X. I've got a Substack. It's called The Accidental Education, where I recount certain stories that I've gone through with my career and the lessons that I've learned from. Because I didn't graduate college. When I started my career, I had no baseline for anything and have been self-taught my entire life when it comes to the TV business. So.
That's awesome, man.
But
thank you again for coming on. I'll put all that stuff in there in the show notes. And you guys listening, please check out the show notes as well for the sponsors over there. We really appreciate Alp and Killcliff and Protect and Red Pill Threads and all those guys for being awesome. So thank you again, Tom. Hope you guys have a good night. Hope you guys enjoyed listening to this show, and we'll catch you on the next episode.